Chapter 12:35. The place where the old chief lived usually required a large eagle to go up and down. However, this was only a bird after all, so it was not completely reassuring. Therefore, there were many round holes left on the cliff walls. When necessary, one only needed to insert a wooden wedge to climb up and down. Jean-Loup had secretly come here to visit his sister many times before, so he was familiar with the route. Although his body was small and skinny, he was only slightly shorter than the old and frail clan leader. He was also very agile, so he didn't need to use a wooden wedge at all. He just dug into the stone hole and climbed up. Just as he was about to reach the top, he placed his hand on a protruding edge, exerted his strength, and slipped into a stone crevice. The stone crevice was more than 100 feet wide, but it was only as wide as an adult's shoulder. He had to use both his hands and feet to climb the holes on both sides. After 100 breaths, he reached the stone cave and poked his head out from below. At this moment, the maids on the cliff were also restless. They couldn't help but jump in fright when they saw a head suddenly pop out. When they saw that it was him, they heaved a sigh of relief and rebuked. "So it's this little monkey. You scared us to death." The moment Jean-Loup's eye came up, he looked around with wide eyes and asked, "Where is sister?" "Looking for your sister." A slightly older woman smiled and pulled him up, patted the dust on his body and said, "Your sister was chosen by the shaman to be his personal attendant. She has been out for half a day." Another female servant said enviously, "Little monkey, you're so lucky. Xiaoying has become the high priest's servant and can live a good life. Poor us, on the other hand, have to serve that old man all day long." "Sister left with the shaman? Why didn't you tell me?" Jean-Loup mumbled. After all, he was still young and had the temperament of a child. He didn't have that many complicated emotions. Since his sister had left, it was better for him to leave earlier. He looked up. He said seriously, "Those demons are coming up soon. Sisters, you should leave quickly." Most of these maids were already 18 or 19 years old, and they found it very funny to see a child speaking with such a serious expression. The slightly older one came up and patted his head, saying, "Little monkey, don't be afraid. With the old patriarch leading the people to deal with the demons, it should be fine." Jean-Loup still wanted to say something, but suddenly there was a commotion below, and then he heard a mournful scream. The maidservants glanced at each other and cautiously walked over. They stretched their necks to take a look, and their faces immediately turned deathly pale. One of the younger girls among them even let out a cry of alarm. He saw a strange red-crowned bird pouncing on the eagle, pressing it to the ground. At this moment, it was using its slightly curved beak to peck at flesh, leaving broken feathers and blood everywhere. There were still two other strange birds circling on the side, but due to the might of the red-crowned strange bird, they didn't dare to go up and fight for it. At this moment, a cry of alarm came from above, startling them. Two pairs of eyes immediately stared over, and with a caw, they circled around. He rushed up. The cavern hall above was spacious and couldn't block the two strange birds at all. One of them was incomparably ferocious. Just now, it rushed in and grabbed a waitress with its mouth. The rest of the waitresses immediately screamed and fled. These women's bodies had been smeared with the juice made from boiling herbs for a long time, and the fragrance was fragrant. It originally covered the smell of their bodies very well. If they didn't make any sound, the strange bird wouldn't have discovered them even if it was close at hand. But that cry of alarm exposed them. At this moment, the other strange bird also leaped up. The claw-ho raised its wings, and the hair on its head stood up. It cawed at the scene, and the waitresses felt as if they had been hit heavily in the head. All of them bled from their mouths and noses, and fell to the ground. Jean-Loup also felt dizzy, but at this moment, the necklace with the bone piece hanging on his neck flashed, and he immediately sobered up. He rolled on the ground, and leaped into the rocky peak that just now came up from. Above him was dark, and there was the sound of flapping wings, and a gust of fishy wind drifted down. Then the strange bird stuck its head in, and almost hooked him. However, this rocky peak was narrow, and its huge body couldn't squeeze in at all. So, it flapped its wings again, and tried to find a larger gap on the outside to squeeze in. Although Jean-Loup was very afraid, He didn't give up on survival and did everything possible to stick to the rock wall. After the strange bird tried many times to no avail, it screeched angrily. Its two sharp claws clasped onto the rock, and it used its sharp beak to peck at the rocks at the side, causing gravel to fly everywhere. It seemed to be trying to force a passageway through. However, the rocks on the outside had been eroded by wind and rain for a long time and were somewhat loose. The inside was very hard, and it couldn't be broken in a short time. This monster tried to stick its head in a few times, but it was just a little bit away from touching Jean-Loup. This demon bird was called Seizing Horn, and it had always been greedy and unintelligent. It would often stare at a target, and even though the waitresses outside were enough to fill its stomach, it still wouldn't let go of the moving prey in front of it. At this moment, Jean-Loup had nowhere to go. There was still a strange bird above him, and there was a cliff below him, so he could only stay here obediently. Thus, the man and the bird were in a deadlock here. Yuan Zhangqing was already close to the place where the cliff was located. He released his spirit shuttle to investigate, and within a radius of several thousand miles, this was the only place where the tribe was gathered. However, at this moment, the entire Zhan tribe had already been breached, and it was a scene of chaos from afar. Many monsters were gnawing on the rock wall, and he couldn't help but frown. His gaze shifted downwards, and a vast aura surged. All the monsters first stiffened, and then they all fled in terror. He flicked his sleeve, and a cloud of black mist flashed past. A delicate and pretty boy came out, and he bowed and said, "Master." Yuan Zhangqing said coldly, "If one runs away after cleaning it up, I'll hold you responsible." The boy responded, and with a sway of his body he transformed into a black-scaled black jiao that was 6 feet long, and chased after the monsters. Yuan Zhangqing swept his gaze again, and suddenly noticed that there seemed to be some weak aura at the side of the cliff. He leaped up, and saw a child hiding in a crevice of the cliff. He retracted his aura into his body, and with a sweep of his mana, he brought the child up. Jean-Loup only felt his vision blur, and he felt that he was already moved to the top. He saw a person in a black robe standing in front of him, and his hair was tied up in a bun. His skin was like jade, and his gaze was unusually sharp. It seemed like he wasn't easy to get close to him, and he couldn't help but feel a little afraid. Yuan Zhangqing asked, "You're from this tribe?" Jean-Loup nodded, and he looked around. He saw broken limbs and bodies everywhere, and it was a bloody mess. Yuan Zhangqing said, "There's no need to look. When I arrived, you were the only one left alive in this tribe." It wasn't easy for the Zhan tribe to survive, and there were people dying almost every day. Life and death were common, and Jean-Loup was used to it since he was young. However, now that he heard that he was the only one left, his heart felt empty and sad. He raised his head and asked, "Sir, are you a mystic cultivator?" Yuan Zhangqing was slightly surprised. After this journey, he also knew that mystic cultivators were the cultivators in this realm. However, this was something that only the leaders of the tribe knew about, and now a child actually knew about it. It was obvious that his background wasn't simple. "I'm not a mystic cultivator, what's your name?" Jean-Loup saw that he wasn't a mystic cultivator, and couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He didn't want to say his name, so he lowered his head and said, "They all call me Little Monkey." Yuan Zhangqing said, "If they call you that, then what's your real name?" Jean-Loup rolled his eyes and said, "I'm Zhan Gun." Yuan Zhangqing said plainly, "Your voice is high-pitched, your gaze is erratic, and you don't have much confidence. Maybe there really is such a person, but you're definitely not him." If he wanted to investigate someone, the simplest way was to use the shuttle to shine into the person's heart. However, seeing that Jean-Loup was young, he was afraid that doing so would hurt his spirit, so he didn't do it. Jean-Loup still wanted to say something, but Yuan Zhangqing suddenly looked down. "Is there anyone in your tribe with the word Lu in their surname?" Jean-Loup was pierced by that gaze, and his little face tightened as he shook his head repeatedly. Yuan Zhangqing said, "The people in your tribe are almost all dead, and there's no need for you to deny that there are people who escaped. Therefore, this person is most likely you. Your tribe is named after the Zhan family. Are you called Jean-Loup?" Jean-Loup said loudly, "Not me." Yuan Zhangqing was even more certain. He scanned Zhan Lu from head to toe, and suddenly, something flew out from Zhan Lu's body and floated in midair. It was a shell, and there was an ancient rune on it, which was exactly the same as what Zhang Yan had shown. Yuan Zhangqing knew that he had found the right person, but he wouldn't argue with a child, so he said, "Kneel down and acknowledge me as your master." Zhan Lu turned and ran. Yuan Zhangqing, however, stood still and watched him leave. Zhan Lu climbed down from the cliff and used the rope to slide down the cliff. He ran towards the forest at the back of the cliff and even fell a few times along the way, but he still gritted his teeth and stood up. After all, his mind was simple, and in his panic, he didn't think about whether he could escape or not. Just now, he had been confronting the demons for a long time, and he was already tired. He didn't eat much, and his body didn't have much strength. After running for a short distance, he started to pant. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in his ears, "It's useless for you to run like this, and it's just using brute force. Do as I say. Your body is like a bridge connecting heaven and earth, and your breath is clear and turbid, turning yin and yang." Zhan Lu could only feel the words being stuffed into his head, and he unconsciously did as he was told. He felt a gust of hot air pouring down from the top of his head. At first it was a small wisp, and then it became more and more. Soon, the hot air flowed through his limbs and bones, and his breathing actually calmed down. He felt like he was immersed in a pool of warm water, and he gradually forgot himself. When he woke up, he found himself lying in a dense forest. Sunlight shone down from between the branches and leaves and shone on his body. It looked like a day had passed. He turned his head and realized that there was a huge, ferocious demon head lying not far from him. He was instantly shocked, and he crawled up with a grunt and retreated backwards. A voice came from behind, "You're awake." Zhan Lu turned his head and saw that the black-robed man from yesterday was standing not far from him. Beside him stood a child about his age, and the child was looking at him with a curious gaze. Yuan Zhangqing said, "This demon is the culprit behind the attack on your village yesterday, and I've already killed it. I've already killed it. Are you willing to come with me?" Zhan Lu still shook his head. Yuan Zhangqing asked calmly, "Why?" Zhan Lu grabbed the bone piece hanging on his neck and raised it up high and said, "I'm a student of Black Cloak Platform. You're not a mystic cultivator. I want to be a mystic cultivator." "Mystic cultivator?" Yuan Zhangqing thought for a while and said, "Where is Black Cloak Platform that you mentioned?" Zhan Lu didn't know where it was, and he only said according to Mo Wen's words, "Shenfang country." Yuan Zhangqing nodded and said, "All right, I'll go take a look and see what kind of tricks this mystic cultivator that you mentioned actually has." Chapter 12:36. Eastern Wastelands 8 Drum Mountain. Ning Chongxian, Tao Zhenhong, and Wen Qingxiang appeared at the top of the mountain. Looking down at the valley with strange rocks and almost no vegetation, Ning Chongxian said, "According to the map given by Sage Zhang, this is where the ancient demon is. According to the records in the Jade Slip, to become an ancient demon, one had to be at least 3,000 years old. Moreover, ancient demons were somewhat similar to heavenly demons. They were also favored by the heavens and earth. They didn't need to cultivate to possess magical powers, and after a long time, they would naturally become almighty. The three of them knew about the abilities of heavenly demons, especially since Tao Zhenren had fought with the Jasper heavenly centipede. If the latter was not at its peak, they would definitely not be able to deal with it. Therefore, they didn't dare to underestimate it. When the three of them came, they had concealed their auras. Even if someone of the same generation was here, it would be difficult to detect them within 50 kilometers. This was not to facilitate a surprise attack, but because they knew that ancient demons also sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. If they scared them away, it would be much more troublesome to deal with them later. Ning Chongxian glanced at them and said, "According to the rumors, the original form of this demon is a demonic insect. After becoming an ancient demon, it called itself the Cloud-Swallowing Great Sage. As for what abilities it has, I don't know. Let's test it out first." Tao Zhenren cupped his hands and said, "Let I give it a try." In the 9 continents, He could identify more than 90% of the strange birds and beasts, and could even tell their origins and strengths. But in the mountain and sea realm, his previous experience was not enough. He took out the origin diagram of the walking beasts and placed it on his arm. The diagram unfurled in an instant, and with a flick of his finger, a crimson ape leaped out. Its eyes rolled wildly, and it leaped toward the valley. Only then did it reach the valley. Suddenly, a ferocious mouth appeared out of thin air. It was so large that it almost occupied the entire valley. The scarlet ape's soul essence was swallowed before it could even react. Then, the mouth swayed for a moment before it disappeared. Although it was only for a moment, the three of them could already see many things. Ning Chongxian practiced the 1,000 Cloudy Sword scripture and was good at seizing qi. He was good at sensing profound qi. He examined the aura that he had captured just now and said, "This demon's origin essence qi is similar to that of an elephant realm cultivator. Its lifespan should be around 6,000 to 7,000 years. When Qingxiang thought for a while and said, "The qi of blood is wide and scattered, not strong. This demon's body seems to have never been tempered." Looking at it this way, it is hard to compare with the body of a celestial demon. This is probably the reason. This demon doesn't want to expose its true form in front of others. Tao Zhenhong said, "Everything has its ups and downs." Just now, the scarlet ape is called the fierce golden ape. It was difficult for external objects to injure him. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have been swallowed by a tyrannical monster, but he should have persisted for a few moments. However, on the diagram, a wisp of his soul had already dispersed. It was obvious that in that instant, his soul had been destroyed. Of course, it was due to his innate abilities, but it was still unknown how big his appetite was. The two of you should be careful later. Ning Chongxian and Wen Qingxiang both nodded. This was the first battle for the cultivators of the 9 continents after entering the mountain and sea realm. There was no room for mistakes, so they had to be cautious. Tao Zhenren took out the Nanhua Master Spirit Bird's chart. Originally, he had been unable to use it. Later, he found the secret cultivation method of the sect leader in the Nanhua sect. Just now, he could open it. He waved his hand, and in one breath, he released over 1,000 spirit birds. However, there were only 3 types of birds. One was called the great heron. It was huge, and when it spread its wings, it could blot out mountains. The second type was called the green goose, and it was good at fighting in groups. The last type was small and exquisite. It was only the size of a finger, and it was called the subtle bird. It flew as fast as lightning. As the spirit birds charged down, a rumbling sound could be heard as the huge mouth once again appeared in the valley below. This time, it wasn't just one, but hundreds of them. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the birds had been swallowed, including the 12 great herons. The next moment, the huge mouth appeared again, and swallowed 90% of the remaining birds. Only a few managed to escape, and most of them were subtle birds. Ning Chongxian said coldly, "Just now, in one breath, the demon has unleashed a total of 638 mouths. Some of them are extremely powerful, even more powerful than the first attack. However, by doing so, its essence qi has been greatly reduced. If it could have dealt with all of its problems in one breath, it wouldn't have needed to attack a second time. This number is not its limit, but it's not far from it." When Qingxiang sensed for a while and said, "The demon's qi of blood has increased slightly. Obviously, swallowing the spirit birds is beneficial to it. It seems that the more prey it swallows, the more benefits it will gain." Tao Zhenhong pondered for a while and said, "After the subtle birds left the valley, the demons stopped pursuing them. Its supernatural power is about 1,000 miles in radius. It is not easy to move its body, and to reduce the consumption of spiritual vigor, it is limited to this valley. It is unwilling to leave this place. In this case, I can attack it from afar, and see how it responds." The 3 of them only probed twice, and they understood the strengths and weaknesses of the ancient demon. However, to be cautious, they tried a few more times, and they realized that the demon only had one supernatural power. Even though the power of this supernatural power was not weak, the method was too simple. After knowing its effect, It was not difficult to find a way to counter it. Based on the current situation, if it did not hide anything else, then it would not be too difficult to deal with it. After a few more words of discussion, the three of them decided to attack. The three clear chi separated, and each of them stood in a position and attacked with mana. In the valley, rocks flew, cliffs collapsed, and mountains collapsed. The devouring cloud sage seemed to be enraged, and his whole body drilled out from the ground. He was 3,000 feet long, and he looked like a long worm. He had no ears or eyes, and there were only big mouths full of sharp teeth. There were countless fluttering whiskers and hairs, and he looked extremely hideous. The mana and supernatural power of the three of them went over, but they were swallowed by the big mouths on his body. Ning Chongxian was keenly aware that the chi of primordial chi in his body was constantly weakening, and it was obvious that it was not without damage. After the devouring cloud sage came out, it seemed that Tao Jinren was the one who started the probing, so he rushed toward him first. Just now, when he was within 1,000 miles, a big mouth appeared where he was standing, and then swallowed him. Just a moment later, Tao Jinren's figure appeared in the distance again, without any damage. Since he knew the ability of this demon, why would he test it with his own body? What was swallowed just now was merely a shadow clone that had transformed into a wisp of chi activity. However, the demon had not been able to distinguish the real from the fake, which surprised him. This meant that the intelligence of this demon was really not high. Ning Chongxian saw this scene and immediately changed his strategy. He pointed with his fingers, and hundreds of sword lights slashed down. However, some of them were fake, and less than 1/5 of them could really be used to hurt the enemy. As expected, the demon did not distinguish, and released hundreds of sharp mouths, swallowing all the attacking sword chi. When Qingxiang smiled and waved his sleeve, and the blood threads in the sky closed, turning into thick blood arrows that shot down. He had just tested that after the big mouth swallowed the first thing, it would need to wait for a moment to come out and show its power. This was a huge flaw. As the blood arrows fell, they immediately melted holes in the body of the swallowing cloud sage. All the big mouths let out a shrill scream and immediately gave up on Tao Jinren and turned to rush toward Wen Qingxiang. At the same time, the wounds on his body were slowly healing. The three of them did not care. Not to mention the celestial demon, the strength cultivators in the 9 continents also had this ability, and to deal with this kind of demon, they only needed to slowly take away the essence of its vitality, and when the oil lamp ran out, it would not be difficult to subdue it. When Qingxiang had been waiting for the demon since it came over. He had always been meticulous, and at this moment, he saw that the demon seemed to be a little slow in moving, which was very different from just now. He could not help but feel a little strange. He knew that his attack just now was not enough to cause serious damage to it, so after a little observation, he found the reason and thought to himself, so this demon does not rely on spiritual vigor to identify the enemy, but on the hair on its body. At this time, the swallowing cloud sage saw that he could not close the distance between the opponent, and suddenly disappeared from his original place. Then a big mouth appeared in midair, and his body jumped out from it. But in the eyes of the three, it was more like the demon had spat him out. This kind of movement was very sudden, and if they were not prepared, they might fall into the trap. When Qingxiang was very careful. Even though he had a great advantage in the battle, he did not have any carelessness. His body swayed, and he turned into a blood light to escape. Seeing that the opponent had escaped, the swallowing cloud sage seemed to be anxious, and once again opened a big mouth in midair. In an instant, there was a huge suction force, and it sucked the blood light into his mouth and swallowed it. Ning Chongxian and Tao Jinren's expressions did not change. The people of Ling's sect were good at the death substitution technique. If they could kill Wen Qingxiang so easily, it would be a joke. The swallowing cloud sage, on the other hand, became a little tired at this moment. It seemed that just now had consumed a lot of yuan qi. Ning Chongxian sensed that the essence of his yuan qi had been reduced by 30 to 40%. Of course, he would not let go of this opportunity. With a wave of his hand, thousands of sword qi slashed down again. As long as the sword qi hit the demon's body or collided with its aura, it would cut off a stream of qi and return it to the sword qi. When he fought with others, if the opponent was entangled in a head-on fight and did not know how to resolve it, it would only make him stronger as the battle went on. Naturally, Jinren Tao and Wen Qingxiang would not stand idly by either. They had completely seen through the demon's abilities. Every time they attacked, it was aimed at its weakness. There was no suspense in the battle. Less than 2 hours later, the three of them had exhausted the swallowing cloud sage to death, and Ning Chongxian collected its body, ready to see if it could be used to refine a magic weapon. He didn't use much strength in this battle, and he didn't use any magic treasures. This wasn't to say that the ancient demon was too weak. On the contrary, its spells were very powerful. However, the key was that it only knew how to use the spells it was born with and didn't know any tactics. On the other hand, the sky demons of the 9 continents were very different. Not only were they all fierce and cunning, but they also learned from others, and even refined magic weapons for their own use. But this was only the first ancient demon they had encountered. Whether the others were the same, they still needed to find a way to verify, and could not jump to conclusions. After the three of them adjusted their breathing in the same place, they discussed a few words with each other, and then took off to search for the next ancient demon. Chapter 1237. Zhang Yan sat on a prayer mat, looking up at the stars in the sky. This part of the world was very different from the 9 continents, and the number of years was also different. He could clearly sense that 1 day in this realm was equivalent to 2 days in the 9 continents. And yet, every day, his lifespan was reduced exactly the same as before. In other words, if you ignored the number of years that had passed on the surface, then your lifespan would be doubled. He shifted his gaze and looked in the direction of the great sun. Before, the sun and moon revolved around the 9 continents. But things were different in this place. The light of the sun and moon was constantly illuminated by different stars. Because they moved forward and backward, and were almost joined together. Therefore, to the people on the ground, it looked like the sun was rising from the east and setting in the west, going back and forth. In truth, it was nothing more than an illusory image. The sun that appeared in the next moment was not the sun that appeared in the previous moment. After the 24 hours passed, the sky above the mountain and sea realm was covered by a barrier of air, and the sun transformed into a moon. The reason for this was that the mountain and sea realm was like any living creature. It also breathed in and out, and when it breathed in, it lit up the sky. When it exhaled, it darkened the sky. Thus, day and night were separated. Seeing this, Meng Hao couldn't help but understand. At this time, Jing Yu carefully walked over. He bowed and said, "Master, just now a disciple sent a message saying that there's a person flying in the sky and heading towards me. It looks like he's a native cultivator. Should we call someone to stop him?" A native cultivator? Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "There's no need to stop him. If he comes to my place, ask Meng Zhen to entertain him." Jing Yu nodded, then left to pass on the message. Thousands of miles away, a large green eagle with a body of more than 1,000 feet flew over. The eagle's neck was covered with a loose lock, and there were long thorns strung on it. On its back, there were 5 people pulling the ropes from behind. If it deviated from its course, if it strayed off course, the eagle would feel some pain, and then it would be pulled back. The eagle's back was wide enough for 100 people to sit on. At the most flat area, there was a canopy. Emodu was sitting under it. Behind him, there were dozens of solemn-looking armored guards. Among them was a young man of 17 or 18 years old. His expression and attitude were completely different from the others. His eyes were filled with excitement and expectation, but also a little uneasy. This was Gong Ziquang's younger brother, Gong Zihuai. This time, it was necessary to bring someone from the Duke clan, so he was also sent along. Squatting on the eagle's head was a dwarf with huge eyes. At this moment, he pointed upwards and said, "Grand Palace Master, it's right in front. We just need to cross that fog barrier." Emodu raised his head and looked. Above him was a ball of thick fog that was boundless and boundless. It was definitely not formed naturally by the heaven and earth. It should have been set up by someone from beyond the heavens. He thought that with the ability of the people from outer space, It would be impossible for them to not discover them. Now that they did not come out to stop them, it was obvious that they had tacitly approved of their arrival. With a stern voice, he said, "Later, no matter what happens, without my permission, none of you are to act rashly." The attendants behind him all acknowledged the order. Emodu raised his hand, and the person riding the eagle in front understood. With a pull of the rope, the great green eagle let out a shrill cry and flew straight up into the clouds. Everyone held their breaths. After they passed through the clouds, the scenery in front of them suddenly changed. Auspicious lights and auspicious air were everywhere. Flying peaks and floating islands were scattered in the vast heaven and earth. From afar, they could see people in feathered robes and star crowns walking in the air. There were even flying boats and spiritual birds flying across the sky and circling around the peaks. On those hanging mountains, the fog was faintly discernible. There were waterfalls and springs everywhere, and countless palaces and halls were erected on them. Between the green branches and trees, one could vaguely see the curved eaves, golden bells, and bronze beasts. Everything here, no matter if it was the clothes, accessories, halls, or mountains, they were all gorgeous and exquisite, and it was greatly different from the scene in the eastern wilderness that was filled with a savage aura. Everyone on the back of the eagle was stunned when they suddenly saw this scene. Gongzi Huai, on the other hand, was very excited, and his eyes lit up. Beneath Emodu's feet was a vast sea of clouds that rolled and floated, spreading to the end of the sky. He could no longer see any part of Eastern Baron, as if he was in another world. And to hang an island in the sky, not to mention that the 4 great academies of Shunfang country did not have the ability to do so, even Eastern Baron country could not do it. In the records of the God Nation, there might be a few words about it, but he dared to conclude that even back then, there were definitely not many of such things. Just from this point, it could be seen that the supernatural ability of the people from outer space was far superior to the countries of Eastern Baron. His gaze fell on those cultivators, and he thought, looking at those people's bearing and demeanor, they are very different from us mystic cultivators. They must have taken a different path of mystic cultivation. However, the flying object under their feet is indeed a powerful weapon of the country, and it looks like an ordinary object. If I can use it, it will definitely increase the national power of Shunfang country. Although there were eagles that could be ridden in the vassal states, these birds were not easy to catch, and they still needed to be specially controlled and looked after by servants. Moreover, their daily food consumption was also a huge amount. It was still okay if they were slightly smaller in size, but only the families of nobles could afford to keep them, and it was difficult to have a certain number of them. However, if there were thousands of such flying boats, the mystic cultivators in the country could go thousands of miles away at any time. Not only could they connect the 4 directions, they could also send troops to a city at any time to deter the other countries. He secretly made up his mind that no matter what price he had to pay, he must find a way to get his hands on this object. At this moment, a little kingfisher flapped its wings and flew over. After circling around everyone, it suddenly turned into a little girl with fair makeup. She clasped her hands behind her back, stood on her tiptoes, and looked up to ask, "Where did you come from?" Everyone's expression tensed up. Spirit demon? In the Eastern Barren Land, demons that could change between human and demon forms were all called spirit demons. These kinds of demons were mostly descendants of the ancient demon saints. Master Gongzi Huai took a step forward and bowed to her, saying, "This lady is very polite." He used the national accent of the Eastern Barren country. After all, the heavenly nation had unified the human path in the past. Whenever there was an alliance between countries, or when the monarchs and ministers of 2 countries talked, they still used this as the official accent. However, the little girl that the kingfisher transformed into did not understand his words. She hummed and tilted her head to think for a moment. Then her eyes brightened and she stretched out her hands. It was a green willow leaf. After Master Gongzi Huai took it, he saw that the little girl held it up with both hands and made a small biting gesture. He understood what she meant, looked at the willow leaf, and sent it into her mouth. "Master." The servants at the side were shocked and wanted to go forward to stop him. However, Master Gongzi Huai waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. He loosened the leaf into his mouth, and when it reached his tongue, he felt it turn into a clear air that seeped into his brain. Instantly, he felt some mysterious changes in his body. The little girl looked at him without blinking and said, "Did you understand what I said?" Master Gongzi Huai nodded, and the little girl was very happy. She started to talk with him, but after a few sentences, they suddenly heard a long whistle in the sky, as if someone was calling the little girl. So, she waved at Master Gongzi Huai, and turned into a kingfisher again, flapping her wings and flying away. Emodu was just now watching and did not come out to stop her. Only now did he call Master Gongzi Huai over, and asked, "How did Master understand the words of the little girl?" Master Gongzi Huai thought for a moment, and said, "It wasn't that I understood her words, but with the help of the willow leaf, my mind and the little girl's thoughts are connected. Even without spoken words, I could understand her meaning." Emodu couldn't help but nod, and he thought to himself, there are many tribes of savages in the forests in the southwest of Shenfang country, but they don't understand the language, and it's hard to recruit them. If we can obtain this method, we can greatly increase the population. He asked again, "Did you ask about the origins of those people from beyond the sky?" Master Gongzi Huai shook his head regretfully and said, "Just now, I only know that the spirit bird is called Shi Chui, and she said that she came from a sect called Bai Yuxian, and is a spirit bird under an elder in the sect." He added at the end, "Huai privately guessed that the so-called sect might be like my school, and that the elder might be someone like Master Gong." Emodu made a sound of acknowledgement. Although the specific situation might not be so simple, he could get a rough understanding from this. Right at this moment, he heard a long and drawn-out cry. He turned around to look and saw a clear light shooting over. Its speed was so swift that it flashed like a bolt of lightning, and many people hadn't even reacted when it had already arrived nearby. The light dispersed, and a beautiful lady with her hair tied up in a bun and a long belt around her waist came out. She bowed to everyone and said, "Honorable guest, please forgive me for not coming out to greet you." Although Emodu couldn't understand her words, he could understand the meaning behind them. He put his hands together, and sent them forward, and returned the greeting. The lady stretched out her jade wrist, and took out a jade scroll, and sent it forward gently. Emodu had a change of mind, and with a wave of his hand, a crystal-clear spirit bird appeared in the sky, and grabbed the jade scroll, and sent it over. When he held it in his hand, he touched it, and a clear light rose. Rows and rows of words floated past his eyes, and there was even a sound of chanting beside his ears. He immediately knew that this must be the language used by the people from outer space. In fact, he was not unprepared for this trip, and he brought along a talking bird. This bird was born with the ability to understand sentimental and spiritual sounds, and it could be used as a translator. However, the other party sent this item, and it was obvious that they had the intention of testing him. As the Grand Palace Master of Shenfang country, he naturally couldn't show weakness and bring down the country's prestige. At the end of the day, he was a great mystic cultivator. Having cultivated to this stage, mere words and phrases were not difficult for him at all. After reading it once, he was already familiar with it. He nodded at the woman and said, "Thank you." The lady smiled and bowed again and said, "Meng Zhen is already waiting in front. Honorable guests, please follow me." As she spoke, she rode the light and led the way in front. Emodu gestured for them to follow, and the big green eagle followed behind them. After traveling for more than 1,000 miles, the misty clouds dispersed, and a huge floating continent appeared in front of them. Just now, those flying peaks and floating islands were like tiny insects compared to it. A man in his 40s with a light beard and long robe stood on a floating tower to welcome them. His body was filled with a vast clear air, and in the light above his head, there were waves rolling. His aura seemed to come from afar, but also seemed to be nearby. Seeing the arrival of the crowd, his gaze turned and landed on Emodu. He bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Emodu chewed on the word, fellow Taoist, and only felt that it was lingering in his memory. His expression turned serious, and he bowed solemnly and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Chapter 12:38. After greeting each other in front of the pavilion, both parties greeted each other by name. Meng Zhen then welcomed Mo Du into the pavilion. As the vice envoy, Gong Zihuai followed beside him. As for the rest of them, there were disciples who came to arrange a place for them to stay. Just now, when the three of them stepped into the pavilion, a voice came from outside. I heard that senior apprentice brother is entertaining a guest, so I wanted to see the elegance of the cultivators of this world. Mo Du turned his head and saw a young man with a golden hairstyle walking in. His aura was unusually grand. He guessed that this was a very important figure among the people from outer space. Meng Zhen said, "Fellow Taoist Mo, this is my junior apprentice brother, Sun Jin." Mo Du put his hands together and bowed. "Fellow Taoist Sunday, Sun Jin came here because he was interested in the mystic cultivators of this world." In his eyes, although Mo Du's qi was not strong, it was already above the Yuanian cultivators. Even if it was not as strong as the Xiangxiang cultivators, it was not too far off. Moreover, Mo Du seemed to be able to resonate with the heaven and earth here. He guessed that Mo Du had some extraordinary skills, so he raised his hands and bowed. At this moment, Gong Zihuai swayed slightly. His face was pale and he was sweating profusely. In the past, he often came into contact with the great mystic cultivators, but they were different from the ancient demons. When they did not use their supernatural powers, they were no different from ordinary people. Just now, Meng Zhen also purposely kept his qi dynamic, so he did not feel anything. However, he did not expect that the spirit tide on Sun Jinren was so vast. It was like a huge wave surging towards him, and the pressure almost made him lose his balance. If he was not a spirit form mystic cultivator, he would have already collapsed to the ground. Sun Jinren saw it and immediately knew what was going on, so he kept his qi dynamic. Only then did Gong Zihuai recover, and he bowed deeply. "Please forgive me for my lack of manners." Meng Zhen thought for a while, and took out an item from his sleeve. He said, "I have a heart-guarding dragon tiger jade, here. It can help to strengthen one's qi and not be tainted by external evils. Today, I will give it to you." Gong Zihuai took a look at Mo Du, and the latter nodded. He straightened his robe and hat and walked forward. He thanked her and accepted it. As soon as the jade was in his hand, he felt full of energy. His breathing was smooth, his ears were clear, and his eyes were clear. It was as if his feet had roots. Just now, that uncomfortable feeling had been completely swept away. He knew that this must be a treasure, so he took out a flat pouch embroidered with ghost runes and divine diagrams, and took out a dragon-headed golden seal that looked like a seal. He held it up with both hands and bowed as he presented it to Miao Yi, saying, "I also ask Master to accept this item." Meng Zhen nodded, and a child beside him stepped forward to receive it. Sun Jinren looked at the pouch with interest and said, "Can you let I take a look at this Jiankuan pouch?" Young Master Huai was slightly startled, and hurriedly said, "Why not?" Sun Jinren focused his gaze. The pouch flew in front of him, and after a few glances, he said, "This item is a complete whole. Even though it has been decorated, it still has fur patterns. It must have been taken from a living creature, and not refined by human hands." Young Master Huai couldn't help but be impressed. Master is very accurate. This pouch was taken from a type of yugen, beast, and then refined by a craftsman. If Master likes it, I can send a few over. This yugen was not easy to catch, and they were rare, so this pouch could only be carried by great mystic masters like Mo Du or nobles. This was not like the 9 continents, where only the lower generation cultivators could use the Qiankuan sleeve pouch. Sun Jinren could see that the refining that young Master Huai mentioned was just to decorate the outside with patterns, and it looked more exquisite, but there wasn't much change on the inside. From this, it could be deduced that the path of refining existed in this world, but it was very rough, and had yet to reach a higher level. After talking for a while, they became more familiar with each other, and gradually turned to the main topic. Mo Du said, "Pardon me for asking, but I wonder where are you all from?" This trip was nothing more than to find out where these people from beyond the heavens came from, and what they wanted to do. Only by understanding these 2 points would there be a possibility of continuing the discussion. Mengzhen didn't hide anything and said, "The place we were originally at is called the Nine Continents, but this world has been opened for billions of years, and the spiritual vigor has long declined, so my sect leader led the cultivators of various sects to your honorable place. At this point," he bowed, "what we seek is to spread our teachings in this world, to establish a sect, and to continue our sect's teachings." "I see." Emodu didn't find it hard to understand. Even if it was the Shunfang Country Middle School, they could only pass on the wisdom of their predecessors through endless inheritance. As for whether what the others said was true or false, they could slowly find out in the future, and there was no need to get to the bottom of it now. He thought for a while and said, "I'm afraid it won't be easy for your side to establish a sect in the eastern wastelands. On this land, most of the lands are already occupied by the demons. Since the collapse of the eastern wastelands, the other countries can only stay in their corners, barely resisting the demons, and no longer have the strength to go out on expeditions to recover lost lands." Enlightened Master Sun sneered and said, "Over here, there is an ancient demon wreaking havoc, and in the land of my 9 continents, there is also a calamity like the heavenly demon. In the past, this generation was completely annihilated by the predecessors of our various sections. Later on, our sects were established on their corpses. In my opinion, today is merely repeating the actions of our predecessors." Young Master Huai was frightened when he heard this. Emodu, however, remained calm. Since the other said this in front of him, then his target was the demons of the eastern wastelands, and this did not conflict with the original intention of coming here. Mengzhen said in a deep voice, "In that case, the original eastern wastelands, thousands of years ago, was under the rule of your god kingdom." Emodu said solemnly, "Exactly." Mengzhen nodded and did not continue speaking. This was the first time the two sides came into contact, and some things could be mentioned slowly. There was no need to rush, so they changed the topic to the path of cultivation. Although the cultivators of the 9 continents had previously obtained the Jade Scrolls and knew a little about the path of cultivation in this world, they did not know the details. After listening to Emodu's words, just now, they knew that the so-called mystic cultivator first used the method of strengthening vitality, taking external medicine, and conditioning one's internal organs, tendons, bones, essence, primordial spirit, and qi. This step could be said to involve both qi and strength. And when one's external yang and internal yin were both full, it was the realm of internal consolidation. This step, however, was to abandon the path of qi and further strengthen the body, like filling up a pool of water. At the realm of opening aperture, one could use one's qi and blood to communicate with heaven and earth, and use all kinds of unpredictable methods. However, there were still many shortcomings in this realm, but they could be made up for through the path of talismans and external objects. At the realm of spirit image, mystic cultivators could use their qi and blood as a foundation and use their consciousness to create a spirit image. Their battle power now was not comparable to before. However, this kind of cultivation method did not have any major barriers in each realm and was very rough and blurry. Luckily, if a mystic cultivator's talent was not too bad, as long as they were willing to use external medicine, it was not difficult to push them to the realm of spirit image. But to go further, it was not so easy. Sun Jinren raised his eyebrows and said, "Fellow Taoist Mo, you have already cultivated to the realm of opening mystic. I wonder if I have the honor to learn a thing or two from you?" Emodu also knew that if his side did not show enough strength, these cultivators did not need to bother with him, so he nodded and agreed. Sun Jinren was a person who did what he wanted to do, and he did not stand on ceremony. With a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a beam of light and flew out of the pavilion, flying up into the sky. Emodu chanted a few words, and a black cloud appeared outside his body, wrapping around him, and he flew up as well. Mengzhen waved his sleeve, and the pavilion around him instantly disappeared, no longer blocking their vision. Seeing such a method, young Master Huai could not help but be amazed. After Sun Jinren and Emodu reached the top, they both stood still. Behind Sun Jinren, a ball of qi slowly appeared. Thunder rumbled, and heavy water bobbed up and down. Bolts of lightning flashed back and forth, and the aura was shocking. At the place where Emodu was standing, blood chi slowly spread out. Then, it condensed and turned into a creature with 2 wings spread out, a tail and fins, a horn on its head, and teeth like swords. It looked like a bird and a fish, and it didn't look any different from a living creature. Mengjin looked at it and nodded, thinking, so this is the realm of opening mystic. It really can transform a human into a great demon, similar to the path of strength, but also different. At this moment, the 2 in the sky had already collided. Because it was not a battle of life and death, they were just testing each other's methods. Therefore, after fighting for a dozen rounds, they both stopped and descended from the sky. After Sun Jinren stood still, he said bluntly, fellow Taoist Mo's method is powerful, but it is not your own ability. In this world, it might be strong for a while, but in the virtual sky, it will be beaten back to its original state. He could see that Emodu's ability was probably above that of a nascent body cultivator, but slightly weaker than Taoist Dong Tian. His divine arts and spells did not have many variations, but he had the ability to use the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth for his own use. Once he did so, he could unleash power that was a few times stronger than his own. Emodu said, I do not seek immortality, I only seek for the longevity of the country. Both of them sought different things, so their paths of Tao were naturally different. No matter what the origin of the cultivation techniques of the 9 continents was, the ultimate goal was to break through the world and ascend, to seek for immortality. Therefore, all divine arts and spells came from oneself. Even if one went to a place without any spiritual vigor, one could still ensure that one's combat power would not be lost. Mystic cultivators were different. The reason why they cultivated was to defend against demons and spirits, so that they could reproduce and survive. Therefore, they only pursued the power of divine arts. As for the rest, as long as it was not beneficial to battle, they could give it up. Mengjin said, if fellow Taoist Mo can let go of worldly matters, you might be able to improve on the path of Tao. Emodu shook his head and said, a country cannot be without a cultivator, and a cultivator cannot be without a country. The countries nurtured cultivators for them to serve the country. Since they received this favor, they had to bear this responsibility, and it was impossible for them to give it up. Moreover, once a mystic cultivator left their country, they would not be able to enjoy the offerings of the country, nor would they be able to cultivate. It was even more impossible for them to survive in the wasteland that was filled with demons and spirits. It could be said that the 2 depended on each other, and neither could be missing. At this moment, Sun Jinren said, may I ask, in the East Baron, how many great mystic cultivators are there like fellow Taoist Mo? Emodu thought about it and felt that there was nothing to hide. Even if he did not say, the other party could find an answer elsewhere, so he said, in the East Baron countries, there are 6 big countries and 13 small countries. The rest are all weak countries, and each country needs at least 2 great mystic cultivators. Just now, we are considered big countries. East Baron country has 5 great mystic cultivators. In my Shunfang country, including me, there are 4. The remaining 4 countries each have 3 great mystic cultivators. Among the 100 countries, there are about 30 great mystic cultivators. On the surface, there are many, but the countries are scattered, and they have to face different tribes and races, so they are unable to unite. If a few ancient demons join forces and attack, the country will be in danger of being destroyed. Chapter 1239. Emodu chatted with Meng and Sun for half a day and felt that he had gained a lot. Although he had the intention of befriending these cultivators, this matter could not be decided in a short period of time. After coming out of the pavilion, the 2 of them stayed in the guest house. At this moment, the sun was setting in the west, and it was already time for dinner. Naturally, there were maids serving up dishes of vegetables, fruits, and fine wine. Young Master Huai saw that these dishes were very delicately made. He raised his chopsticks and tasted it. He felt that it was unusually fragrant when it entered his mouth. When it entered his stomach, it immediately turned into a warm and clear stream of air that flowed through his entire body. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Before mystic cultivators reached the state of metaphysic, They paid special attention to things that could nourish their own blood essence. However, most of the ingredients were demon flesh and blood, which had to be eaten raw. At most, they would just smear a layer of salt on it. Usually, he would not feel much about it, but compared to the delicacy in front of him, he did not dare to think about it anymore. Emodu also raised his chopsticks and had a taste. He nodded and said, "It's indeed delicious, but the medicinal strength is a little lacking." Master Huai couldn't help but say, "Even if the effects of the medicine are not enough, it's not a big deal to eat a few more meals. If I can enjoy such delicacies every day, my journey in the world will not be in vain. I have already decided that when I return, I will send a chef from the palace to come here and learn this cooking method." Emodu did not say much. At the profound comprehension realm, the only thing he could consume was the blood marrow of demons. Ordinary things were no longer of much use to him. Whether it was delicious or not, he did not care. After eating a few more mouthfuls, Gongzi Huai seemed to have thought of something. He put down the jade chopsticks and asked in a low voice, "Grand Palace Master, why didn't you use your divine arts when you were fighting with Sun Gaosher during the day?" Emodu shook his head and said, "We're just testing each other, there's no need to be so serious. I haven't used my divine arts and that Taoist sun has also held back." Young Master Huai said with a smile, "I'm afraid those experts of the 9 continents don't know, but if Master Mo and the Imperial Palace Masters of the country join hands, the power they can muster is not just 4 people, but several times more." Mystic cultivators did not just focus on individual combat power. Shen Fanghua and the other 4 Grand Palace Masters joined forces. The amount of heaven and earth spiritual vigor that they could mobilize could be multiplied by several folds. And the more great mystic cultivators there were, the more powerful they were, the more powerful they would be. However, this technique was like a child waving a sledgehammer. If one was not careful, they would injure themselves. Mo said, "Gongzi, Shenfanghua and Shenfanghua don't have to fight with each other." Ziyan said, "Gongzi, son, Shenfanghua doesn't have to fight." Putting aside the fact that he was inferior to fellow Taoist Sun, even if he won, so what? The fact that these cultivators of the 9 continents were able to travel through the heavens and earth to come here means that there are even more extraordinary people above them. Hearing this, Gong Zihuai was stunned at first, then he showed a worried expression and said, "Grand Palace Master, do you think the warriors of the 9 continents will invade the eastern wilderness?" I Don of the Ming. With Mo's they use the hand. However, the eastern wasteland is vast enough. I'm afraid that the cultivators of the 9 continents wouldn't care about this small territory of the 100 nations. Taking a step back, even if we destroy all the countries in the eastern wasteland, they still have to face the demons and devils. At least for now, we don't have to worry about this. Young Master Huai nodded and felt much more at ease. At the same time, Meng Jin came to Zhang Yan's pavilion and reported what he heard today. Zhang Yan said, "Try to entertain this group of people. If they have a request, as long as it is not too much, we can agree." Meng Zhen nodded and said, "Hall Master Du Zhen, do you want to borrow the name of East Wasteland Divine Kingdom? Exterminate the demons of the land and occupy the land?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "When a mortal country goes on an expedition, they still pay attention to a justifiable reason. They have to slay the demons and restore the territories of the human Tao. This is the name of righteousness." Meng Zhen nodded. He thought for a while and said, "The mystic cultivators of East Wasteland are very different from us Qi refinement cultivators. But there are many of their cultivation techniques that we can learn from. For example, the talisman technique. Drawing patterns on the body can increase one's combat power. Maybe we can send some junior disciples to East Wasteland Academy to study this technique." Zhang Yan agreed. There is no such thing as a perfect and flawless method in this world. Stones from other mountains can be used to attack jade. If Shen Fanghua is interested, we can allow the foreign students to come to our sects to cultivate. Meng Zhen stroked his beard and said, "In Hall Master Du Zhen's opinion, can this mystic cultivator technique be cultivated to the realm of ascension?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and shook his head. "It is very difficult. These people only seek the ability to fight. This is also due to the situation. Under the siege of the demons, they have no choice but to do so. But because of this, they have a small gain but a big loss. If they can't completely solve the external threat, even if thousands of years pass, they will not be able to produce someone who can match the mortal cultivators. The path of cultivation is about both cultivation and refinement. The cultivators of the 9 continents can sit and watch for hundreds of years. But in East Wasteland, the countries are constantly fighting. At the same time, they have to guard against the demons and other species. There is refinement but no cultivation. Their vitality is greatly depleted, and there is little benefit. As time passes, even their lifespan will be shortened. In fact, this is also the biggest shortcoming of mystic cultivators. They do not seek longevity, and because of the external enemies, they fight year after year. Even great mystic cultivators usually only have a lifespan of 1,000 years. Only a few can live up to 2,000 years. It is destined that they do not have enough time to climb to a higher realm. If the 100 countries of East Wasteland work together to free some of the great mystic cultivators to focus on cultivation, then they can try to reach a higher realm. But now it is impossible. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Mo held a jade bead in his hand and was quietly sensing the chi dynamic within. It was a mystic weapon, a gift from Meng Zhen. He had tried it before. Although it is small, it contains great power. After the conversation with Meng Zhen and Sun Mo, the separation of chi, strength, and technique gave him great inspiration. But at this stage, it is impossible to go back. If he wants to increase his combat power, he can only try to make an issue of external objects, and the mystic weapon is undoubtedly the best choice. But his own chi dynamic is mixed. It is not an easy task to communicate with the spiritual consciousness within and refine it as his own. So these few days, he did not step out of the pavilion. The refining method of the 9 continents is extraordinary. If I can learn a thing or two from the craftsmen in the country and make a mystic weapon for my use, it will be easier to deal with the ancient demons and other species. Just as he was thinking, the pavilion door opened, and young Master Huai ran in excitedly. Mo sighed and put away the jade bead. He said, "Young Master, did you see something good again?" Young Master Huai was a little embarrassed. After they stayed here, every time he saw something new, he could not help but come back to tell Mo, but there were many things that looked good, but only cultivators could use them. In the end, he was happy for nothing. He clasped his hands together and said, "Grand Palace Master, I have learned of a very important matter. If we can get the help of the cultivators of the 9 continents, our Shenfang country will no longer have to fear the ancient demons and other species." Mo did not dare to believe that there is such a good thing, but he will not give up any chance to strengthen Shenfang country, so he said seriously, "Young Master, please say it." Young Master Huai said, "Grand Palace Master, I just now know that people of low status like Sun Mo and Meng Zhen are addressed as Heavenly Abode." Mo pondered and said, "Is there anything special?" Young Master Huai said, "I did not understand it at first, but after investigating I found out that any cultivator who has reached this level can find a way to open up a small world in this world, which can accommodate thousands of mountains and rivers, the sun, moon, and stars." What? Mo suddenly stood up and said, "Is this true?" Young Master Huai nodded his head and said, "It is true. I did not believe it at first, so I asked many cultivators, and the answers were the same." Mo was shocked, not only because of the heavenly abode's means, but because he thought that if Shenfang country could obtain a heavenly abode, the benefits would be unimaginable. Then he slowly calmed down and thought to himself, to be able to open up such a small world, it is not that easy, but I can try to talk to them. Even if Meng Zhen and Sun Mo are not willing, I can try to find other sections. In these days, he already knew that the cultivators of the 9 continents did not come from one sect, but like the 100 countries of East Wasteland, they were divided into different sections. The Qinsong school that Meng Zhen was in and the other Shaoqing school were the 2 most powerful sects, just like East Wasteland and Shenfang country. Other than them, there were other sects, but their strength was much weaker. Cultivators needed external things to cultivate, and he thought that as long as he paid a sufficient price, he might be able to persuade them. At this moment, there was a commotion outside, and he was surprised. Ever since he came here, it had been peaceful and quiet every day, and such a commotion was rare. Young Master Huai came to the door and found 2 attendants. He said, "The 2 of you, go and find out what exactly happened." The 2 attendants received the order and left. Not long after, the 2 of them returned, and one of them said, "Reporting to young master, I heard that there are 3 experts who went out to kill an ancient demon, and now they have returned." Killed an ancient demon? Young Master Huai was stunned, and then he asked anxiously, "Did they succeed?" The 2 attendants said that they did not know. Young Master Huai stomped his feet and pointed outside, saying, "Why didn't you ask clearly? Go and find out again." The 2 attendants hurriedly agreed, and then turned and ran out. Emodu judged, if the 3 who went out to kill the ancient demon are not weaker than that fellow Taoist son, it shouldn't be difficult to succeed, but I wonder which great sage was killed this time. After a long time, one of the attendants ran back with a head full of sweat, and he said, "Reporting to young master, I found out that 2 ancient demons were killed. One was Great Sage Devouring Clouds, and the other was Great Sage Mottled Afterglow." Young Master Huai could not help but let out a carefree laugh, and he clapped his hands, saying, "Good kill, good kill, these 2 demons have harmed the people of my country." He cursed for a while, and then he turned his head outside, sighing, "I wonder when the countries of East Wilderness will also go out to fight against ancient demons." Emodu just shook his head. The great mystic cultivators of the various countries usually had to guard the country's territory, and it was impossible for them to go out to fight. Once the country was empty, there would be foreign enemies coming to invade, and there were many demons. Even if they could kill 1 or 2, it would not help the overall situation, and instead, it would make the other demons hostile. Although Shunfang country was a big country, if it was surrounded by several ancient demons, it would still not be able to defend. If it was just for a moment's pleasure, it would have long been destroyed. At this moment, he thought, I wonder which sect these 3 perfected ones are from. I might as well use this opportunity to get to know them, and maybe I can ask one of them to help me open up a cave abode. Chapter 1240. When Ning Chongxian and the others returned to the heaven-patching formation, the envoy of the Eastern Barren Country had also left the capital and headed toward the North Sea. Different from Shun Fanghua, who rode on the eagle, he rode on the Diabolo Golden Feather. This thing was bigger than a palace and had 3 levels. It had 7 rooms, a building, a hut, a pavilion, a kitchen, a military room, and a study room. It could accommodate thousands of people. Especially in the 2nd level, there was a piece of fertile land with hundreds of grains planted. Under the activation of the runes on the 4 walls, the grains ripened every 3 days for the people and demon birds to eat. Such a large carriage was made up of 60,000 little golden-winged phoenixes with runes on them. They were tied to the silk and flew with the wind. On the feather, there were people playing the chi-chi and beating the drums at the same time, causing the birds to fly in an orderly manner without any disorder. The sound of the drums was vigorous and intense, moving for thousands of miles. What was especially eye-catching was the pair of demon birds leading the way. They each had 6 wings, and their feathers were as smooth as silk. Under the sunlight, they shone brilliantly. They were the son and daughter of the great sage Yang. They were trapped by the Eastern Barren Country and became slaves of the chariot. Among the 100 countries of the Eastern Barren Country, only the Eastern Barren Country dared to look down on the ancient demons. First, they were powerful. Second, they had the protection of the Bodu city left behind by the God Nation from 10,000 years ago. They were not afraid of the ancient demons. At this moment, in the middle of the palace sat an old man wearing a royal robe and a crown. On his robe was embroidered a picture of gods and humans. This was made by the Eastern Barren Country's sun sacrifice duke. He looked dignified, and his eyes were cold and domineering. On his 2 sides, there were 3 Gong clan's royal grandsons. They were Gongzi Yu, Gongzi Tong, and Gongzi Qiong. The 2 Gongzi were looking left and right with high spirits, but Gongzi Qiong seemed to have something on her mind. She had bright eyes and snow-white skin. Her nose was high, but her silver hair was different from normal people. It was very eye-catching because her birth mother was a female slave from the Jade race. The Jade race lived in the northern border of the eastern barren country. The men in the race had stiff limbs and were as heavy as an elephant. As for the woman, she was similar to the human, but she had silver hair, scarlet eyes, and snow-white skin. Under the light, she looked like a beautiful jade sculpture. However, it was also because of this that she did not have any status in the country. If the two sides came to an agreement on this mission, it was very likely that she would be sent away in the name of a marriage alliance. A white bird with a long beak flapped its wings and flew over. He stopped on the copper tree in front of the palace gate and spat out a bunch of letters into the copper vat below, making a loud dong sound. Immediately, a servant came over and picked up the stack of papers. Bending his body, he held the papers above his head and took small steps to bring them to young Master Yu's table. Gongziyu took it. He took a few glances and said, "Sun offering. The envoy from Shunfang country has not returned for half a month. It seems that he has been staying with those people from beyond the heavens these days. I wonder what exactly they talked about." Gong Xianzhao said unhurriedly, "Shunfang country has only risen for thousands of years. What do they know? Do they really think they can compare with our East Barren country? I'm afraid they don't even know that they are the people from beyond the heavens. There are also strong and weak ones. Those who use their own strength to cross the heavens are actually very few. Most of them only rely on external forces. Their divine arts are at most similar to great mystic scholars." Gongziyu raised both of his hands. He respectfully asked for guidance. "Then what kind of people from beyond the heavens does Sun Offering think they are?" Gong Xianzhao said, "These people came on a big fish. They look like the former. However, it doesn't matter if they are the latter. If they don't have a foothold, they are nothing. There's no need to be too respectful. If it wasn't for the two high priests being appointed to beyond the heavens and the invasion of the ferocious creatures, how would the god nation collapse? Don't look at our god nation's decline for a while. When the two high priests return, there's no need to fear anyone." Gongziyu thought, "That's true. However, 7,000 years have passed. No one knows if this is true or not. Moreover, distant water can't quench a nearby fire. Our East Barren country has enough enemies. This time, as the vice envoy, I have to find a way to form a good relationship with these people from beyond the heavens. I must not make them fall to the side of Shunfang country." Although he looked young, he was already more than 600 years old. As the grandson of the Gong family, he was naturally familiar with some of the ancient rumors in his country. However, some things were too long ago and it was difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. It was even possible that the younger generation deliberately whitewashed and fabricated the stories. He didn't really believe it. However, Gong Xianzhao's status was above his. Since he said so, no matter what he thought in his heart, he could only agree on the surface. After traveling for a while longer, the sky gradually darkened, and a day was about to pass. Numerous braziers had already been lit on Yue. However, right at this moment, the tens of thousands of little phoenixes suddenly became restless and uneasy, and even the two rainbow-winged demon birds displayed even more unusual reactions. They ceaselessly stretched out their necks and cried out loudly, as if they were calling for something. Not long after, a long chirp echoed in the distant sky. Gong Xianzhao's eyes were bright. He looked outside and said, "They really came." Only 10 breaths later, a charming woman appeared in the sky and blocked the way. She looked at the two rainbow-winged birds with a face full of love. Then her face turned stern and she scolded, "Gong family bastard, how dare you enslave my children? Today I will destroy your feather. Without this thing, let's see how you can intimidate the other countries." Although the East Barren Divine country was scattered and there were no more people above the Tongxian realm, the current East Barren country had inherited most of the former's legacy. Among all the countries, it was undoubtedly the most powerful. And the Diabolo Golden Weave Feather was also passed down in the ancient times. It could carry 1,000 Xian warriors on an expedition. The East Baron country used this to intimidate the disobedient officials and subdue the other countries. Although the method of building this thing still existed, if it was broken, it would be impossible to build another one with the country's current strength. Gong Xianzhao strode out. Looking at his expression, he was not afraid at all. He stood in front of the hall with his head held high and said in a loud voice, "Shu Yang, since I, Gong Xianzhao, dared to come out, how could I not expect you to come here? Today, I will capture this ancient demon and make it pull my chariot." Gong Ziyu put his hands together and bowed, saying, "Yang, this demon bird is also beautiful. Can you make her a concubine? I think it won't be a disgrace to her." Gong Xianzhao laughed and said, "This matter is not unnegotiable." When great sage Yang saw the two of them being unbridled, he was unable to restrain his rage, and he let out a howl as he revealed his true form. It was a demon bird that was shaped like a rainbow phoenix and had 8 wings on its back. As soon as its 7-colored wings flapped, strands of rays of light arose in the sky and sprayed down towards Yang. Gong Xianzhao snorted and stirred the blood in his body. In no time, he turned into a huge golden bird. With a flap of his wings, golden rays surged and blocked the rays of light. The two sides were in a stalemate for a while. Seeing that he could not win, great sage Yang knew that his opponent's divine ability had improved. He knew that his opponent's divine ability had improved again. In the past, to prevent himself from being injured, he would try to retreat. However, at this moment, he was ruthless. He kept chirping and sprinkled the rays of light down. That was because he knew that it was rare for the great mystic cultivators of Eastern Wilderness to leave the 100 nations of Eastern Wilderness. Such opportunities were rare. If he missed it, he would not know how long he would have to wait to rescue his children. Gong Xianzhao looked as if he had expected it. At this moment, he should have been defending and waiting for the other party to be exhausted before charging forward. However, he roared and leaped into the air. He charged forward bravely. Yang was stunned and let out a shrill roar. He did not show any weakness. When a mystic cultivator reached the mystic enlightenment realm, his corporeal body was not much weaker than an ancient demon's. However, there were still many shortcomings. Therefore, she was not afraid of such a battle. In the blink of an eye, the two huge bodies collided. At this moment, Gong Xianzhao made an action that defied common sense and allowed the other party's sharp beak to penetrate him. 2 huge claws locked onto a pair of colorful wings. Yang was shocked. She did not know what the other party wanted to do, but instinctively felt that it was inappropriate. Therefore, she struggled with all her might. However, no matter how crazily Gong Xianzhao bit, he refused to let go. At this moment, below, Gong Ziyu shouted loudly as he leaped up. He seemed to have used too much strength, causing the entire winged serpent to tilt slightly. When he arrived in midair, he straightened his body and suddenly transformed into a golden armored deity. After that, he raised his fist and punched the great sage Yang. The bones on Yang's back were all broken. She spat out a mouthful of black blood along with her broken internal organs. Her eyes were filled with disbelief as she screamed, "Gong Xianyu, when did you become a great mystic cultivator?" Gong Xianyu sneered. In the past, if there was one more great mystic cultivator in the country, it would be announced to the world. However, this time, it was deliberately kept secret to prevent an attack from an ancient demon on the way. Yang was filled with regret. If she had known that there were 2 great mystic cultivators here, she would definitely not have come here alone. 2 great mystic cultivators were not just compatible in terms of numbers. Moreover, they were of the same bloodline and had similar cultivation methods. Therefore, the power of the supernatural powers that they could unleash was several times more powerful. Moreover, just now, she was caught off guard and suffered a serious injury. How could she fight against these 2? Gong Xianyu did not say much. The pattern on his back twisted, and dazzling runes fell from his body and floated into the feathers of the huge bird. The latter gradually lost its strength. Divine pattern? Great sage Yang had never expected that they would be willing to pay such a price for the sake of capturing her. These divine inscriptions were inscribed in the Eastern Desolation Divine Kingdom, and there weren't many left now. Every time she used one, there would be one less left. When she thought that it was very likely that she would become great sage Yeong's servant, she started to panic as well, so she begged for mercy. But no matter how she begged, the two of them turned a deaf ear to her. In the end, when she saw that there was no hope, she said hatefully, "If my father finds out about this, he'll surely not let all of you off." Gong Xianzhao snorted and said, "Your father is far away in the northern cold abyss. How could he stand up for a lowly girl like you? Moreover, even if he came, I have Bodu City, so I have nothing to fear." Yeong knew that he was speaking the truth. She gritted her teeth and said, "Even if your Gong family can escape, your eastern wasteland 100 nations can forget about peace." Gong Xianzhao said coldly, "What does the life and death of those traitors have to do with my Gong family?" Yeong no longer had the strength to speak and slowly became exhausted. The two of them then dragged her onto Yue Wei. Immediately, over 100 Xian masters came forward and carved the imprisoning rune on her body. Gong Ziyu retracted his blood qi and returned to his original form. He came to the side of the pale Gong Xianzhao and said, "What does Sun Ji plan to do with this demon bird?" Gong Xianzhao said, "Shu Yang is right. Her father Qing Pai Great Sage is indeed troublesome. Then let's give her to those outsiders as a greeting gift." Gong Xianzhao was shocked. He thought that Gong Xianzhao was going to frame him and advised, "Sun Ji, I'm afraid this is not appropriate. If those outsiders find out about this," Gong Xianzhao waved his hand and said, "Our Gong family does not do such despicable things. Later, we can tell them the origin of this demon and see if they dare to accept her or not." Gong Ziyu thought about it and said in admiration, "Sun Ji is brilliant." At this moment, they still had not figured out the background of those outsiders. They could use this to test their depth. If they dared to accept her, then they would have to treat them seriously. If they dared not, then there was no need to pay too much attention to them. Chapter 1241. After capturing Great Sage Yeong, the envoy from Eastern Barren Country took another 2 days to reach the heaven-patching formation just now. Yet, Gong Shizhao ordered Yue Wei to stop here. He had lived for more than 1,000 years, and not only was he knowledgeable, his sense of danger was also better than others. He could sense that the cloud ahead seemed to contain a great power that could grind them to pieces. It would not be appropriate to go forward rashly. After some thought, someone came forward and bowed with his hands together. He said loudly, "Eastern Barren Country's sun offering Gong Shizhao and Gong Ziyu are here to visit." After a while, as if an invisible hand was moving in front of him, the clouds slowly dispersed, revealing a path. Gong Ziyu was about to order Ji Wei to go forward when Gong Shizhao stopped him. "Wait, hang the divine flag." Gong Ziyu wanted to say that it was unnecessary, but after some thought, he did as he was told. After he gave the order, 50 mystic cultivators worked together and just now, they raised a blood-red flag. This flag was called the Nation Guarding Divine Flag. After Eastern Barren Country unified the Barren Continent, they gathered the power of various tribes and forged a total of 86 of them. Wherever the mystic cultivators went, they would raise the flag to defend the righteous and avoid evil. Until now, most of the flags had been destroyed, and Eastern Barren Country only had 18 left. Knowing that they might encounter an ancient demon, they placed one of them on Yue Wei. Thus, this was not an expedition, but an envoy. Therefore, it was not raised high, but hung by Yue Wei's side. The moment the flag was unfurled, there was a boom, and a brutal and domineering aura spread. All the mystic cultivators felt their blood boil, and their fighting spirit soared. Only then did Gong Shizhao relax. "Let's go." Gong Ziyu also felt slightly agitated. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. With a wave of his hand, the drums behind him started playing. Tens of thousands of demon birds flapped their wings and flew together, dragging Yue Wei forward slowly. Soon, they disappeared into the clouds. At this time, in the pavilion, Gong Zihuai also received the news. He dismissed the messenger and came into the room. "Grand Palace Master, the people from Eastern Barren Country are here." Emodu said, "Looking at the time, they should be here soon." Young Master Huai said anxiously, "Then what should we do?" The Eastern Wasteland country and our Shinfang country have never been on good terms. If the Eastern Wasteland country can get their hands on many good things, their national power will definitely increase greatly. Mo Du said calmly, "This cannot be stopped. However, young Master Du and I came half a month earlier and have already obtained many benefits. We cannot ask for too much." Young Master Huai asked tentatively, "Grand Palace Master, about the matter of establishing a small world." Mo Du frowned and said, "In the past few days, I visited those fellow Taoists who killed the ancient demon. However, they didn't seem willing to talk about this matter." Gongzi Huai lowered his head and thought for a while, then said, "I haven't had much contact with these people from beyond the heavens yet. It's inevitable that they won't agree." Mo Du shook his head and said, "That's not the only reason. This matter is not as simple as it seems. We can only discuss it later. However, if we can't get it, the Eastern Barren country can't get it either." Gongzi Huai relaxed a little and said, "That's fine. Just what we have now is enough to increase the national power of our Shenfang country by a lot." After the Eastern Barren country's people arrived, they were also arranged in a guest house. However, Meng Zhen already knew that they were not on good terms with the Shenfang country. Therefore, the two sides were in different territories, which also prevented them from meeting each other face to face. At dusk, Meng Zhen came to the pavilion where Zhang Yan lived. After greeting him, he sat down and said, "The Eastern Barren country's emissaries who came today have given us a meeting gift that is neither too big nor too small." Zhang Yan asked, "What gift?" Meng Zhen said, "It is an ancient demon. It is said that he is the son of a demon king in the northern heaven wintry abyss." Zhang Yan didn't care about the identity of the ancient demon. When he heard the words, "Northern heaven wintry abyss," his eyes flashed. He asked, "This person knows about the matters outside of the Eastern Barren lands?" The sects of the 9 continents wanted to rebuild their sects in the mountain and sea realm. Of course, they wouldn't limit their vision to the Eastern Barren lands. They had also asked the people of the Shenfang country about the situation outside of the Eastern Barren lands. However, although Mo Du was the Grand Palace Master, it was difficult for him to explain clearly. Therefore, they still didn't know what the situation was like in the Eastern Barren lands. Meng Zhen said, "If not for this, there is no need to disturb Hall Master Du Zhen. The Eastern Barren country has existed for 7,000 years, and its inheritance has not been broken. From the words of the emissary, there are some ancient secrets that will be useful to me." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Tomorrow, bring this person here. I need to see these too." Meng Zhen cupped his hands and bowed, then left. Inside the guest house, Gong Shizao and Gong Ziyu were talking. The scenes they saw during the day caused them to be greatly shocked and fearful, especially under the circumstances that these outsiders were aware of the great sage Yang's origins, yet they still didn't mind and accepted it, causing them to not dare underestimate them at all. When the two of them were discussing what to do next, they heard a voice coming from outside. "Are the 2 emissaries here?" Gong Shizao said, "Which fellow Taoist is it?" As soon as the door opened, a young Taoist with an extraordinary appearance walked in. Gong Shizao recognized him as Zhou Xian, a disciple of Meng Zhen. He stood up and clasped his hands together, saying, "So it is fellow Taoist Zhou." Zhou Xian also cupped his hands and said, "2 Taoists, this lowly Taoist has come here to pass on an order. Tomorrow, Qinsong School Hall Master Du Zhen wants to see the 2 of you. Is it convenient?" Gong Shizao had a rough idea of the situation during the day. He asked, "What is the position of this Hall Master Du Zhen in your noble sect?" Zhou Xian smiled and said, "My Qinsong School has 3 Hall Masters under the sect master. Hall Master Du Zhen is one of them." Gong Shizao nodded and clasped his hands together, saying, "It is not inconvenient for me to be here." Zhou Xian said, "Then I will take my leave." After he left, Gong Shiyu waved his hand to his attendant beside him. The attendant understood and also left. When he left, he closed the door. Gong Shizao said in a deep voice, "The Meng Zhen we saw during the day had a vigorous qi dynamic like the vast ocean, unfathomable. I heard that this person is not only an elder, but also the eldest disciple of the sect master. It is not strange that he has such supernatural power. And this Hall Master Duzhen seems to have a higher position than this Meng Zhen, so he should be the real person in charge. I just don't know if his ability is more brilliant. Gong Shiyu said hesitantly, from what I see, that Meng Zhen is only one step away from reaching that state. If Hall Master Duzhen is still above him, could it be that he is that kind of person? Gong Shizeo said in a deep voice, no matter what, we will know tomorrow. After Zhou Xian returned to his lodging, he summoned a Daoren person and asked, how is the matter that the sect instructed? How is it going? That Daoren person said, according to Uncle Master's instructions, I have already sent over 1,000 demon disciples to the ancient demon territory. However, there are no letters coming back these few days, so there should be no results. Because they chose to befriend the various countries of Eastern Wilderness, the demons would definitely be their future opponents. Although they received quite a lot of information from the various countries of Eastern Wilderness, both Qinsong and Shaoqing thought that they still needed to find a way to understand this matter themselves. Fortunately, a portion of the North Nether Continent's demon disciples under Qinsong school came in handy at this moment. Therefore, they picked out quite a number of demon disciples and ordered them to find a way to infiltrate the ancient demon territory. Zhou Xian said, keep a close eye on them. This is arranged by the sect, so do not neglect it. That Daoren person said, I dare not to delay the sect's important matters. However, if there is any news, I will definitely report back in time. The night passed quickly, and it was the second day. When the morning sun rose, Gong Shizeo and Gong Shiyu were led by a boy to the front of a hall. The boy said, Hall Master Duzhen is in the inner room. The two of you just need to enter. Gong Shizeo nodded, tidied up his clothes and stepped into the hall. When he reached the inner room, he raised his head and saw a young Taoist dressed in a black robe sitting on a jade platform high above. However, just now, when he looked at him, there was a loud bang in his head. He suddenly felt a huge pressure on his body, as though he was carrying a huge mountain on his back. His face flushed red, and he actually could not take a step forward. Gong Shiyu was even more unbearable. His body bent and he almost knelt on the ground. The cultivation method of the two was to strengthen the qi of blood and communicate with the external yang. The Tao that they walked was more inclined towards the Tao of strength. As for Zhang Yan's 6 paths of strength, when the qi dynamic collided, it suddenly gave them endless pressure. In their eyes, the person sitting on the jade platform was like a demon god. The brilliant qi of blood and qi shot up to the sky. That was not all. What shocked them even more was that standing in front of this person, the qi of blood in their body could not communicate with the qi dynamic of the outside world. This was as though they had been beaten down by a few levels. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and retracted his aura. He extended his hand and said, the two of you, please take a seat. Gong Shizeo let out a long sigh, but he did not sit down. Instead, he bowed and said, I dare not. In front of you, there is no place for the two of us. Gong Shiyu also bowed down. Although they thought highly of themselves, the entire eastern wasteland country worshipped power. Although they felt that Taoist Master Meng's Qi Dao cultivators were extremely powerful, they were not as shocked as this kind of blood-qi collision. They had an illusion that the person in front of them only needed to stretch out his hand and he would be able to crush the two of them into pieces. With such a difference in power, they had long lost their arrogance. All that was left in their hearts was deep admiration. Zhang Yan did not force them. He said, I am a little interested in the matters of the Eastern Barren Land. I heard that the two of you know a lot about it. Please do not hesitate to tell me. Gong Shizeo bowed and said, I dare not. Master, please ask away. I will not hide anything from you. This conversation lasted for half a day. The two of them only left when the sun set. At this moment, on the table in front of Zhang Yan, there was a map drawn by the divine kingdom of Eastern Barren years ago. His gaze stopped at a certain place in the northern heaven cold abyss for a while. He asked, How is everyone's recovery? Jingyu replied, This place is full of spiritual opportunity, far surpassing the land of the 9 continents. In addition, there are pills prepared by Master Zhou when he was in the 9 continents. In a few days, everyone should be able to recover their mana. Master, are you going to deal with that great sage Qing Pai? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, a demon is nothing. However, that place seems to be suitable for Qinsong to establish a sect. Instead of waiting for him to come to us, I might as well go to him first. He raised his head and said, pass down my order. Every sect's spiritual master will have a discussion in the hall 10 days later. Chapter 1242. P.S. I have something to do today and tomorrow, so I will update as usual. Friday and Saturday will have 2 chapters if there are no accidents. At the edge of the dense forest, 3 figures walked out from a sparse forest. The one in front was a Taoist in a black robe. He was spotless and there was no mud under his feet. Behind him were 2 7- or 8-year-old children. One of them screamed and ran out. Then, he lay on the ground facing the sky and started to take deep breaths. Yuan Zhangqing looked at the mountains in the distance. After the forest, there was a vast plain in front of him. After walking for another 1,000 miles in the southwest direction and passing through the mountain pass, he would reach the border of Shinfang country. Although he said that he wanted to go to this country, he did not fly in the air. Instead, he walked on foot with Zhan Lu. It took him more than half a month to walk out of the vast forest full of towering ancient trees. There were many monsters and beasts in the forest. They were not a threat to him, but to a child like Zhan Lu, it was enough to be fatal. Every time they encountered a life and death situation, he did not intervene, but only gave pointers from the side. Zhan Lu was stubborn, and he did not ask for help. Unexpectedly, he managed to survive by relying on his unwillingness to admit defeat. At this moment, Zhan Lu was completely different from half a month ago. Although there was not much change in his body, his eyes became extremely bright and full of vigor. It was like a beautiful jade that was polished and finally revealed a threatening light. At this moment, another child walked up and said to Zhan Lu, Senior brother Zhan, it is not safe to leave the forest. There are also fierce wolves and leopards in the wilderness. It is not good for you to lie down. Zhan Lu clenched his fist and said indifferently, What are you afraid of? It is not like I have not seen them in the forest. If they come, I will still beat them. Yuan Zhangqing said indifferently, Don't think that you have some strength now. It is supported by the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth that entered your body half a month ago. However, your body is too weak. Without a strong foundation, it is like a bag that leaks everywhere. It cannot store any qi dynamic. After it is exhausted, you will be beaten back to your original state. Zhan Lu was not convinced. He got up and took out the necklace around his neck. He raised it and said, I can already understand the words on it. When I finish reading it, I'll be as strong as Zhan Gun. Yuan Zhangqing glanced at the words on the paper and said, If you don't consume external objects to nourish yourself with blood energy, you won't be able to cultivate this technique. Then don't even think about cultivating it. He turned around and instructed, Yuan Ping, go catch a beast full of blood and qi. Yuan Ping hurriedly agreed and was about to leave when Zhan Lu said, I will go with you. Yuan Zhangqing did not stop them. Watching the two leave, he sat down cross-legged and circulated his energy to regulate his breathing. An hour later, an inky flood dragon soared through the air and threw a dying yak onto the ground. Then it swayed. He returned to his original appearance of a little Taoist boy. Although this was not the first time Zhan Lu had seen such a scene, he was still very curious as he looked around and asked, Little Yuan brother, are you really a flood dragon? Yuan Ping said, Senior brother Zhan, I am a flood dragon, not a flood dragon. Zhan Lu laughed. Of course he knew he was a flood dragon. But every time he said that, Yuan Ping would seriously correct him. It was really funny. Yuan Ping looked at the Mengniu that was still bleeding and urged, Senior martial brother Zhan, drink it quickly. It will be useless if it's too late. Zhan Lu also knew the gravity of the situation and grunted. He walked to the side of the yak and laid down. Facing the bloody hole, he gulped down the blood. Although it smelled fishy, he didn't feel any discomfort. When he was in the Zhan tribe, his sister took care of him, but he still lived a life of hunger and hunger. Usually, he could only pick some wild fruits or fish from the sea to fill his stomach. Now, he couldn't even drink the blood of the venomous sea even if he wanted to, so how could he dislike it? Only when he could drink no more did he wipe his mouth and stand up. At this moment, he suddenly heard an eagle's cry from afar. Zhan Lu glanced at it and did not pay attention to it. He used to live by the sea cliff and had seen all kinds of strange birds. He had long been used to it. But Yuan Ping could hear that the cry was sharp and anxious, as if it was attacking something. Although it was still quite far from them, he did not want to cause trouble, so he said, "Senior brother Zhan, let's go back." After Zhan Lu finished drinking the nightmare blood, he felt as if there was a ball of fire in his body. His skin turned bright red, as if he had an inexhaustible amount of energy in his body that he urgently needed to vent. After saying yes, he madly ran back the way he came. Yuan Ping followed behind with a cloud of smoke rising from his feet. Zhan Lu looked and said, "Little Yuan brother, did you learn your skills from Zhenren?" Yuan Ping shook his head and said, "I am not master's disciple." He looked at Zhan Lu with some envy and said, "Senior brother Zhan, your luck is really good. In the 9 cities, there are countless people who want to be master's disciple, but master refused, but he is willing to accept you." Zhan Lu muttered, "Is Zhenren Yuan very powerful?" Yuan Ping said seriously, "Master is a Yuanian cultivator, and the 9th disciple of Hall Master Du Zhen. How is he not powerful?" Zhan Lu replied, "Is he as powerful as a mystic cultivator?" Yuan Ping was honest and obedient. He had never seen a mystic cultivator before and could not tell who was stronger, so he could only shake his head and said honestly, "I don't know." Zhan Lu laughed as if he had won. Although he was young, it was not that he could not tell who was good to him. It was just that he had a stubbornness in his heart, and once he made up his mind, he would not turn back. But after a while, the two of them returned to where they came from. Yuan Zhangqing looked at Zhan Lu and said, "Blood qi is rolling. If it is not restrained and accumulated early, it will still be useless." Zhan Lu heard this and hurriedly took the bone piece in front of him. There were many small words on it, but when he looked at it again, it actually gathered into pictures, and the human figures inside were making different movements. He rubbed his eyes. With a look of pleasant surprise on his face, he began to fiddle with it according to the drawing. This picture had a name. It was called Refining Rule Diagram. It taught people how to use blood qi to circulate the meridians, regulate the organs, tendons, and bones. It was also the fundamental method of cultivation for mystic cultivators. Only by mastering this could one move blood qi to the maximum in the future. This diagram focused on strength. It did not teach people how to breathe. According to the method, it required the person who practiced it to continuously move the tendons and bones of the body, to adjust the force around the body, and to practice the minor details, so that the blood qi that was swallowed into the body could be absorbed. Just now, it could be considered useful. However, the first step was actually very important, because it was not suitable for everyone. Usually, it required guidance, or else it would only take twice the effort for half the result, and in more serious cases, it might even destroy one's foundation. But Zhan Lu was young. He did not understand the theory. He only needed to follow the drawing and practice, and he would become a mystic cultivator. In reality, when Moen gave him the Dharma bones, he also wanted him to come to MOE stage to look for him after he could understand it, and when he was officially given the title of a student, he would then give him guidance. Also, without external medicine to replenish blood qi, it was useless no matter how much practice. At most, he could only slightly familiarize himself with the movements. He did not expect Zhan Lu to have such an encounter. At first, Yuan Zhangqing did not see the profoundness in the words. That was because he did not pay attention to these crude Dharma practices. Now that he paid a little attention, he only looked for a while, and he saw through the key points. He was very clear that if he did not say anything now, Zhan Lu would go the wrong way, and he would never be able to become a mystic cultivator in the future. But he did not do so. Instead, he spoke out and reminded him, "Practice poorly." He pointed his finger, and with a swoosh, more than 10 human-shaped pictures appeared on the ground. They were clearly inanimate objects, but the people in them stretched their limbs, and they were alive, as if they were about to jump out of the ground. He said, "Go take a look, see which ones are suitable for you." There were only a few patterns on the dermic bones, but with his cultivation base, he could see through them at a glance. With just a thought, he could deduce hundreds of different variations. However, with Jean-Lou's physique and aptitude, there were only a dozen or so patterns that were suitable for him to practice. Jean-Lou looked at him and walked in front of those pictures. Just now, his gaze was instantly attracted. He felt that there were a few of them that were very easy to understand, and he could not help but move along with them. Unknowingly, more than 2 hours had passed. Jean-Lou moved continuously, but he did not feel tired at all. His body was warm, and there was no longer the unbearable heat from before, and his spirit was unusually excited. He felt the benefits, and just as he wanted to continue practicing, Yuan Zhangqing said, "Stop before you go too far. Moving the blood qi is indeed beneficial to the organs, but the damage is not small. You need to recuperate after this, and do not move anymore." Jean-Lou did not dare to disobey. Previously, when he was in danger in the dense forest, it proved that Yuan Jingqing's words were correct every time. If he did not do as he said, he would be the one to suffer in the end. At this moment, Yuan Zhangqing suddenly sensed something and looked up. He saw on the opposite hillside, there were 2 big yaks pulling a large cart over. This seemed to be a prison cart, and there were 5 or 6 men and women wearing black linen clothes inside. All of them looked haggard, and their hands and feet were tightly bound by thorns. Beside the cart, there was a strange person. He was extremely tall, and a normal person could only reach his waist. His upper body was bare, and his chin was hard and protruding. He had a white beard, and his skin was like dead wood. When he walked, he paused as if his body was incomparably heavy. In the prison cart, there was a short-bearded man who inadvertently glanced over, and saw that there were several figures opposite him. His spirit was instantly lifted, and he hurriedly shouted, "Are those people from Shunfang country? We are the students of Kai Kai Academy, and were accidentally captured by this scholar tree person. If you can inform the country, my Chiu clan will definitely reward you handsomely." When he shouted, the strange person also saw Yuan Zhangqing and the other 2. With a loud roar, his body expanded rapidly, and suddenly, he turned into a giant that was 1,000 feet tall. With rumbling steps, he walked over, causing the ground to rumble. When the short-bearded man saw this, he became even more anxious. However, after calling out a few times, he saw that the person opposite him did not respond at all. He thought that the person was scared silly, and he could not help but sigh and give up on that thought. However, at this moment, there was a rumble as if thousands of lightning bolts fell from the sky. The sky darkened, and the short-bearded man's ears were buzzing. After a while, he came back to his senses, and when he looked again, he was dumbfounded. The scholar tree person was already charred, lying on the ground with his back facing the sky. He was excited and thought to himself, the scholar tree person's body is harder than metal, and only spirit form realm mystic cultivators can deal with him. Could it be that a palace master passed by? Not long after, a voice sounded in front of the prison cart, saying, "Are you all mystic cultivators?" The prison cart was very tall, and the short-bearded man could not see the person's figure, so he nodded and said, "Yes, we are the students of Kai Kai Academy." However, what he heard next made him very ashamed. "Senior brother Jean, mystic cultivators don't seem to be as powerful as you said." Chapter 1243. The heaven-mending formation map gathered thousands of mountains and rivers, and was as big as a continent. On top of the highest mountain, there was a huge palace that occupied half of the formation map. Among the 9 continents, this sect originally had an outstanding position. This place was originally the place where the heaven-mending pavilion sect masters and the various sects discussed matters, so it was built to be extremely magnificent. At this moment, on the plaza in front of the palace, there were 2 great demons restrained. On the left was a demon bird that looked like a colorful phoenix with 8 wings on its back. Its entire body was tied up by golden chains, and its slender neck was stuck to the cold jade on the ground, looking like it was waiting to be killed. On the other hand, the other demon didn't have the appearance of a beast. Instead, it was a rolling and coiling ball of red and yellow smoke. However, there was a snake head at the top of the cloud, and 4 thick claws stretched out from below. The claws were covered in scales, and they looked ferocious and ugly. Compared to the cloud that was like a brocade, it was completely different. Because the 2 demons had already had most of their essence energy and blood energy sucked out, they looked listless and listless. A gust of wind blew past, and after it dispersed, Zhou Xian came over with his disciple Zhou Xianer. He came to the side of the 2 demons and personally checked the chains. The 2 demons seemed to be aware of it, but they only struggled a little, and then there was no more movement. Seeing that there were no problems, he said to the 2 guarding disciples, "In another day, the spiritual masters will come here to discuss matters. At that time, these 2 demons will still be useful, so you have to watch them carefully, don't make any mistakes." The 2 disciples respectfully nodded. Zhou Xianer asked curiously, "Teacher, what use do these 2 demons have? On the other hand, the feathers of the bird are gorgeous. If they are peeled off and spread on the mattress, it will definitely look good." Zhou Xian said, "Don't think about it, the sect has other uses for them." Zhou Xianer thought for a moment and said, "Then maybe they are tamed by sect Master Tao, so that I can use them." Zhou Xian nodded and said, "There is such a possibility, but this matter has nothing to do with us. Right now, we just need to watch them closely." Before great sage Yang came here, he was fed the water of wisdom. He could naturally understand the words of the 2, and when he heard that they wanted to enslave him, his heart was filled with anger and fear, and he screamed, "My father is great sage Qing Feng. Who dares to touch me?" Zhou Xian glanced at her indifferently and ignored her. He flicked his sleeves and left with Zhou Xian. One of the guarding disciples scolded her when he saw that she wasn't being honest. As soon as she made the incantation gesture, the chain shook and absorbed some of her vital essence. Great Sage Yang struggled unwillingly for a while and then fell down powerlessly. At this moment, a sarcastic voice was heard from the side. "Shu Yang, why are you asking for trouble?" Great Sage Yang was enraged. He turned back to stare at the clump of smoke not far away. "Ban Xia, you are a mere desolate fey with a messy bloodline. How dare you talk to me like this even though you're lucky enough to gain sentience?" Great Sage Ban Xia said, "You're usually high and mighty, but so what? Weren't you still captured by others? You and I are both prisoners now, so what's the point of differentiating between us?" Yi Yang grunted and said, "I was just careless for a moment. Once my father finds out about this, he'll definitely come to save me." Great Sage Ban Xia said, "Great Sage Qing Pai's power is indeed not weak, but the northern heaven cold abyss is far away. I'm afraid that before he receives the news, you'll already become the slave of these people from beyond the heavens." Great Sage Yang said angrily, "Wishful thinking. I won't obey you even if I die." Great Sage Ban Xia gloated and said, "That's not up to you." Great Sage Yang heard that something was wrong and stared at him. "Ban Xia, do you want to rely on this person?" Great Sage Ban Xia said indifferently, "So what? You haven't fought with these people from beyond the heavens, so you don't know how powerful they are. Even if Great Sage Qing Pai really came, he might not be able to save you." Great Sage Yang revealed a look of disdain and said, "What do you, a desolate fey, know? My race is the descendant of the Huanming Fey ancestor. Even the Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom didn't dare to cross the border and invade us. Not to mention my father, just my brothers can mobilize more than a dozen ancient great sages with a casual command. How can these people from beyond the heavens compare to them?" Great Sage Ban Xia was stunned by her words. The bloodline of the Radiant Destruction Fey bird race was ancient and could be traced back to the ancient Fey ancestors. Even today, their power was still incomparably huge. Although those people from beyond the heavens were all powerful, he only saw a few of them from the beginning to the end. If there were really only a few people, it would indeed be difficult for them to fight against Great Sage Qing Pai. However, he didn't admit defeat and said, "So what? Those people from beyond the heavens have colluded with the Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom. Even if you bring your race south, you might not be able to defeat them." Great Sage Yeong was even more disdainful. "If it wasn't for the agreement between Gong Tua and my race, how could the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland last until today?" As the two demons bickered, the two disciples on guard duty didn't stop them. Instead, they stood off to the side and memorized everything that was said, preparing to hand it over later. After some time passed, two plumes of white smoke drifted over from the horizon, landing on the square in front of the temple. Soon, two figures were revealed. The one in front was a young Taoist, with black hair and white robes. He was handsome, and he looked at the two demons thoughtfully. Behind him was a lady with a graceful figure and a veil on her head. She had also noticed the two ancient demons and asked, "Master, is the reason why when Jinren invited us this time related to these demons?" The young Taoist said, "Of course. Master has heard that many of the lands in the mountain and sea realm are occupied by demons and devils. If we want to establish a sect here, we will have to fight them. I presume Reverend One wants something from them." Even as they spoke, a blood-colored light suddenly flashed behind them, and the light in the sky flickered. The young Taoist sensed something and turned to look, then nodded in greeting to the person behind him. The woman curtsied and said, "Greetings, Reverend Wen." When Qingxiang cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Shui, Reverend Wei, greetings." After the three of them exchanged greetings, when Qingxiang walked toward the two demons and waved his sleeve, a mist of blood sprinkled down, and the two demons immediately fell into a deep slumber. Then he said, "Today, I've invited you two here on the orders of Reverend Zhang to investigate something on this ancient demon, so I had no choice but to ask for your help." When Shui Dingyuan heard this, his heart trembled, and he said, "What does Reverend Wen want me to do?" When Qingxiang didn't say it directly, but said, "Earlier, I followed fellow Taoists Ning and Tao to capture an ancient demon. I originally thought that even if there were differences in the other demons of the 9 continents, their foundations would be similar. However, after this ancient demon was brought here by the fellow Taoists of the Eastern Barren Country, I discovered something different about it. Please take a look." He flicked his finger, and countless tiny blood-colored lights fell, cutting open wounds on Great Sage Yeong's body. Great Sage Yeong's body trembled, and there were many wounds on his body, but then, the blood and qi in his body vibrated, and the wounds recovered in a short time. Shui Dingyuan saw that the bird demon's physical body was strong, and it was not afraid of external injuries. There was nothing strange about this. Even the demons of the 9 continents could do this. However, he knew that when Qingxiang wouldn't speak without thinking, so he still paid attention to it. After all, he was a Taoist master of nascent embryo. In just a few breaths, he discovered a place that was easily overlooked. The golden lock was specially refined, and it restrained the demon's mana. In other words, if it wanted to recover from its injuries, it could only use its own vitality. Generally speaking, once a demon or a human cultivator did this, their lifespan would decrease. However, the strange thing was that this demon was not affected at all. When Qingxiang said with a smile, "Sect leader Shui, you must have noticed." Shui Dingyuan pondered for a moment and said, "This doesn't make sense. The vitality may be strong or weak, but it should be as much as it should be. There's no such thing as not being damaged after using it, unless there's another vitality that can be used to replenish it." When Qingxiang said, "Sect leader Shui is right. I was also puzzled, but after careful research with sect leader Tao, we found that the strangeness came from the demon's blood essence. Compared to just now, its blood essence must be slightly thinner. When this demon was captured, it already had 9 wings, but now that the 9 wings have disappeared, it's obvious that it has retreated. It can be imagined that if it suffered serious injuries in succession, the 8 wings may not be able to be preserved, and it will most likely be reduced to 7 or 6 wings." Shui Dingyuan thought for a moment and said, "It seems that the ancient demon's path of cultivation focuses on nurturing its own vitality. If the vitality is thick and pure, it can transform to a higher realm. If the vitality is weak and thin, it may regress. Wen Qingxiang said, "Exactly." Xue Dingyuan nodded. At this moment he had vaguely guessed the reason why Wen Qingxiang invited him here. Wen Qingxiang cupped his hands and said, "According to the Eastern Barren Country's fellow Taoists, this bird demon has a great background, so I want to see what it looks like when its vitality is full to the extreme. But among all the sects, only your sect has such ability, so I can only ask the two of you to come forward." Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment and then said, "I will help you in this matter." He signaled to Spiritual Master Wei, and the latter nodded. He first took out a pearl and placed it in the air, and then he lifted his veil, revealing a pair of misty eyes that were like misty rain. He glanced at Great Sage Yang, and the bird demon was at a loss and became sluggish. This was the Origin Mirage Gate's divine ability, Ancient River Flow. It could pull an opponent into an illusion, causing them to experience all kinds of mental changes, and thus wear down their will. But this wasn't his goal at this moment. He just wanted to create the illusion that his vitality was constantly strengthening in the bird demon's sea of consciousness. Spiritual Master Wei continued to circulate his magic power, and in the illusion, the feathers on Great Sage Yang's body became more and more gorgeous, and the number of wings on his body increased as well. From 8 pairs to 10 pairs, and then from 10 pairs to 12 pairs. In the end, an enormous long-tailed eagle with wings that covered the sky could be seen. Its eyes were extremely ferocious, and it seemed to have noticed that someone was spying on it, so its gaze swept over in an instant. Her body couldn't help but tremble when her gaze met the eagle's. The pearl above her head shattered, and her consciousness withdrew from the illusion. She calmed her mind slightly, and then she drew a line with her slender finger to condense a talisman. She said, "Spiritual Master Wen, the demon's transformation is all within it. But I don't know if I've found the source." Chapter 1244. Wen Qingxiang thanked him and took the talisman. He glanced at it and his eyes flashed. He then bowed and said, "Then I need to go back and report. I've troubled you two today. I'll definitely come to the residence to thank you another day." Xue Dingyuan returned the bow and said, "You're too kind, enlightened Master Wen. Since this plan is for the cultivators of the 9 continents, I will definitely help." Now that Wen Qingxiang was the only one left in the Blood Soul sect, and he heard that he took back the sect treasure, the Blood God Waterfall, he could be considered the next sect master. Thus, his tone was very polite. Wen Qingxiang smiled. After bidding farewell to the two, he turned into a bloody light and flew into the sky. Enlightened Master Wei walked up and said, "Master, are we going back to the residence as well?" Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment and said, "We have to go to the hall tomorrow to discuss matters. The spirit opportunity here is not weak, so there's no need to go back. We'll just meditate here for the night." He then turned around and said, "Besides, I'm also interested in these 2 demons." When Enlightened Master Wei heard this, he raised his finger and sent out a ball of Shin Qi. He said, "Master, this is what I just now see." Xue Dingyuan cast his gaze over. As soon as the sea serpent moved, scenes floated before his eyes and finally focused on the vulture. However, he was not like Enlightened Master Wei. Even without the help of treasures, he was not forced back by the ferocious aura. Perhaps the great demon's original body was extremely powerful, but the one in front of him was only an illusion. It could not do anything to him. If a cultivator with a different cultivation method saw this scene, the result would be different. Yuan Ying and Blood Soul sect were both spiritual sects, but the direction of their cultivation was very different, so the gains they could obtain were also different. As long as he engraved this illusion into his heart and used it for his own use, he could release it when he fought against an enemy, and the power of his divine ability would increase. After a few hours, Enlightened Master Wei noticed that his master's aura had slightly increased, and he could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After a cultivator formed an origin embryo, their magic power could no longer grow. However, this change in aura was clearly a sign that his cultivation had improved, and he was taking that step. She bowed and said, "Congratulations, Master." Xue Dingyuan, on the other hand, looked at ease. He said, "It's just a small gain. There aren't many opportunities like this. However, if I can capture a few more great demons whose bloodline can be traced, it can help me improve my cultivation." At this moment his body felt slightly warm. He turned his head to look. In the mountain and sea realm, the first rays of dawn were peeking out, and golden light rose up for tens of thousands of meters. Without even realizing it, the night had passed. At this moment, the sound of a bell rang out, each louder than the one before, reverberating throughout the entire continent. Not far away, a creaking sound could be heard. It was the door of the great hall in front of him opening. A ray of sunlight instantly penetrated through, illuminating the deep and vast inner hall. Xue Dingyuan smiled. He said, "It's almost time. Follow me into the hall." Reverend Wei responded in a soft voice and followed him into the palace hall. In the next hour, rays of spiritual light rose from the various mountains and landed outside the main hall. It was the people from the various Grotto Heaven sects arriving one by one. However, because it wasn't time for the meeting, they weren't in a hurry to enter the hall. Instead, they chatted outside in twos and threes, exchanging their experiences. In the 9 continents, each sect's reverend had to guard the mountain gate. The slightest movement would attract the attention of their peers. Normally, there were only a few fellow Taoists who were on good terms with them. It was extremely rare to see such a situation. Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting were from the East Victory continent, so they weren't familiar with the cultivators of the East Flower continent. They also didn't contribute during the Great Calamity, so after nodding to each other, they didn't say anything. The two of them walked up to Yang. Ji Xiangping looked at them and said, "So this is an ancient demon? It doesn't look like much. Compared to the Jasper Heavenly Centipede, it's a far cry." Gan Shouting said, "I was talking to Tao Zhenren the other day, and he said that these people are everywhere in the mountain and sea realm. In the future, they will be our opponents when we establish our sections." Ji Xiangping pursed her lips and said, "So what? These two demons have lived for more than 3,000 years. There are only a few who can cultivate to this stage. If we kill them one by one, it won't be hard to kill them all." Gan Shouting said, "Taoist brother Ji is right. Although the two of us helped the Qinsong school collect earth and qi, we didn't do much during the human calamity. If we want to have a stable foothold here in the future, we will have to contribute more than others." Ji Xiangping waved her hand and said indifferently, "That's not a problem. Do you think I like to sit around all day? It's just that the spirit qi in the 9 continents is scarce. If we move, we will lose a lot of magic power and essence qi, which in turn reduces our lifespan. The spirit qi in the mountain and sea realm is abundant. After a battle, we can recover in half a month. It's the perfect place for us to use our skills." Gan Shouting said, "Right now, the 2 sect leaders are out in the outer world collecting pure spirit qi. Everything has been handed over to Taoist Zhang. Although the two of us don't have much of a relationship with Taoist Zhang, we are still friends. I don't think he will make things difficult for us. As long as we put our hearts into it, it won't be difficult for us to establish a new situation." Ji Xiangping said, "Taoist brother Gan, I've heard that the pure spirit qi can help us improve our cultivation. A few days ago, sect leader Tao obtained some. It's only now that our sects have arrived here, and there are many things to do. That's why we have such an opportunity. We can't miss it." Gan Shouting thought for a moment, then said, "The Zhongtai and Xianyu sects have also come here. Since we are both from the Dongsheng continent, why don't the two of us take care of them?" There was nothing wrong with Ji Xiangping. The two of them were the only cultivators from the Dongsheng continent. Compared to the cultivators from Donghua, they were really too weak. Moreover, these two sects also had methods to cultivate to the Grotto Heaven. In the future, there might be another Grotto Heaven spiritual master. Even if they didn't talk about this, Tao Zhenren was still the Zhongtai sect's high priest. If they could help him now and do him a favor, it would be beneficial to both sides. As the expression technique disappeared, Yi Yang woke up slowly. However, at this moment, her body tightened, and the feathers on her body stood up instinctively. She seemed to be frightened. She could feel that there was a huge qi dynamic outside her body. It seemed that each of them could pose a fatal threat to her. This made her extremely uneasy. She curled up her body and buried her head in her wings. She opened her eyes and looked outside. Under the golden sunlight of the sun, there were many figures in front of her. All of them were emitting spiritual light that was majestic like the tides of the ocean. In terms of the strength of their qi dynamic, those great mystic cultivators couldn't be compared at all. She was shocked and angry, but at the same time, there was a trace of confusion. There were more than 20 people who called themselves cultivators in front of her. Perhaps the real number was more than that. If they joined forces with the 100 countries of Eastern Wilderness, they could indeed compete with the Demon Bird clan of destruction. If Qing Pai Sage knew the real situation here, he wouldn't have mobilized so many people for a lowly girl like her. Different from her, mottled Cloud Sage showed an obedient look. Originally, he was worried that the other party was weak and that he wouldn't have a good ending if he surrendered. Now, his confidence was greatly boosted. As long as the other party spoke, he would surrender. At this moment, a distant chime came from the mountain peak. Hearing this, the group of true cultivators tidied their robes and entered the hall. This hall was divided into 3 floors. Ingchuanqiu, Mengjida, Qiyuntian, Qingchenzi, Huaxian, and Yuan Hongyang passed through the group of true cultivators and came to the seats on the 2nd floor. At the top, there were 3 praying mats. Not long after, a dozen chimes rang out, and an enormous aura descended upon the hall. The mountain seemed to bear a great deal of pressure, and began to rumble. Someone's expression flickered, and he whispered, "It's Reverend Zhang." At this moment, a rumbling sound came from above. The group of true cultivators looked up to see the air above the jade platform split open, and a young Taoist wearing a black robe stepped out. When he stepped onto the platform, the entire hall trembled slightly. When the true cultivators saw him, their expressions turned serious, and they bowed in greeting. As for Meng Zhen and the others, they bowed in greeting. Zhang Yan nodded, then spread out his robe and sat down. "Reverend Masters, please take a seat." The true cultivators bowed again, then sat down on their respective praying mats. Zhang Yan looked down, first at Meng Zhen and the others. He smiled and said, "The cultivators of the 9 continents have been in the mountain and sea realm for a month now. How are the Reverend Master's recovery?" Meng Zhen said, "The spiritual opportunity of this realm is abundant. The cultivators of the Qinsong school have all recovered their magic power." Ing Chuanqiu said, "The vitality of the Shaoqing school has recovered." Yuan Hongyang also replied, "Reverend Zhang, there is nothing wrong with the cultivators of the spirit sect." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The cultivators of the 9 continents have crossed the void primal sea and experienced 6 years of danger. Just now, we have found a place to settle down. The most important thing now is to rebuild our sect and pass on our Tao." He waved his sleeves and a spiritual light flashed behind him. A map flew up and spread out on the roof of the hall. Whether it was the distribution of the mountains, the rivers, or even the places where the demons and spirits resided, everything was recorded in detail. "The mountain and sea realm is vast and boundless," he said. "We still don't know where the borders are. This map was given to us by a fellow Taoist from the Eastern Wastelands, and it shows the 4 regions and 4 borders." Everyone raised their heads and looked back and forth in the picture. They were new to the mountain and sea realm and didn't know much about it. If they wanted to establish their own sect, they would have to rely on this map for a long time. Zhang Yan continued, "The place where we are now is known as the 6 continents of the North Sea. Although it looks vast, comparable to the original 9 continents, compared to the 4 regions, it is still a remote place. If you go west, you will find the Eastern Wastelands. Other than the 100 nations of the Eastern Wastelands, which I have some dealings with, the rest are occupied by the demons, devils, and spirits." When everyone in the temple heard this, they looked at the map again. The 100 nations of the Eastern Wastelands only occupied a palm-sized area, and their expressions turned somber. During the past month, with the exception of a few people, most of them had been in secluded meditation, hoping to recover their magic power as quickly as possible. Although they had learned a bit about the situation from others, it was not as clear as this map. At this moment, everyone understood that if they wanted to rebuild their sect in this world, they would definitely have to face off against these fiendish demons. Chapter 1245. C_D. All the perfected masters present were very clear that if they wanted to fight the demons of the mountain and sea realm, they had to know themselves and their enemies. Lots of good novels, equals? Less than or equal to little fan said, it was unwise to rush forward without understanding the opponent. It was best to understand the inside and outside of these creatures and make all the necessary preparations before making a move. Wu Wei said, Perfected Master Zhang, are those demons imprisoned outside the hall such as these? Zhang Yan said, those of the mountain and sea realm call them ancient demons. These demons are similar to the sky demons that wreaked havoc in the 9 continents 10,000 years ago, but there are also differences. He turned his gaze and looked in a direction below the platform. Perfected Master Wen, you and the perfected masters can understand the differences. Wen Qingxiang coughed and stood up. He then told him everything he knew about the ancient demon. He was very detailed, basically describing the strengths and weaknesses of the ancient demons. All the perfected masters in the hall nodded as they listened. However, they all knew in their hearts that there were strong and weak ancient demons, and their abilities were different. They had only come into contact with a few ancient demons now, and they were all obtained by Wen Qingxiang alone, so they could only be used as a reference, and could not be used as a guide. Hibiko Higashi of Jiuling sect said, according to what perfected Master Wen said, there are differences between the nobility and the lowly among the ancient demons? Wen Qingxiang said, that's right. The demon outside the hall who calls himself the Great Sage Jiang is the daughter of a demon king in the northern wintry abyss. Her bloodline can be traced back to a demon ancestor. Hibiko Higashi did not understand. What is a demon ancestor? Wen Qingxiang said, there are many rumors about the demon race, but after some research, I found that they are similar to Ji Longjun and the sun-swallowing green locust of the 9 continents. Hearing this, the perfected masters were on guard. Dragon Monarch and Demon Locust were both ancient sky demons. When the West Continent was at its peak, they only fought them as equals, but did not exterminate them. If not for the Earth's roots being dug up and the help of Tai Ming, Hong Ho, Yao Han, and other cultivators from beyond the heavens, they would not have provoked them. More importantly, they were usually blessed by heaven and earth. They were the hardest to kill. Pang Yunxiang asked, Taoist Zhang, may I ask if there are still demon ancestors in this realm? Zhang Yan smiled and said, since then, there have been no records of them appearing in the history of the world. It's just that this generation has a long lifespan, so we can't say for certain that they don't exist. At this point he paused. However, even if such a demon appears, everyone need not be afraid. I and the 2 sect masters will deal with it. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, everyone, you don't have to take the demon ancestor too seriously. 10,000 years ago, when the cultivators of the West Continent fought against the fiendish demons, they did not only rely on their own dharmic powers, they also had the help of many dharma weapons. To read this book, please go to the Cotton Candy Novel website www.myanhuating. Ceasing. In this world, the path of refining is crude and shallow. Even if the demon race has great magical powers, they don't have any protective treasures, and their ability is not comparable to the 9 continent sky demon. Everyone nodded in agreement. The reason why Dragon Monarch and Demon Locust were hard to deal with was that they were strong. Secondly, this demon face had refined protective treasures and was very familiar with the magical powers and cultivation techniques of various sections. However, without dharma weapons, they were like fierce beasts with broken teeth and claws. Even though they were fierce, the threat was reduced by half. Zhang Yan smiled and said, speaking of dharma weapons, I would like to invite perfected ones to take a look at something. He raised his hand and said, Sect Master Tao, you can take it out now. Tao Xinren bowed and stood up. He took out an item from his sleeve. It was half a foot in size and looked like a circle. However, the edge of the circle seemed to be faintly discernible. He threw the ring, and it landed right on a bronze cauldron in the temple. The ring flew over, and the top of the cauldron began to disappear. Then, it spread downwards, and when the ring landed on the ground, it completely disappeared, as if it had been wiped off the face of the earth. What a strange Dharma weapon. What is it? The perfected ones could feel that this circle could threaten them. Usually, only spiritual weapons could hurt the people of Dongtian. However, this treasure did not have a strong fluctuation of spiritual vigor. It was not even a Xian weapon. Tao Jinren said, the reason why this item is so powerful is not because of the means of refining, but because of the precious materials used. As you all know, a month ago I, Jinren Ning, and Jinren went to kill the ancient demon, and this treasure was refined by an ancient demon named Swallowing Cloud. Wen Qingxiang said with a smile, this Swallowing Cloud great sage has the ability to swallow everything. Even if we were to enter its stomach, we would not survive. However, this Dharma weapon has reproduced its ability. Tao Jinren said, exactly. In fact, it was not easy for him to refine the Dharma weapon. He had studied some secret methods in Butian Pavilion and the methods passed down from Xianyu Palace in Nanhua sect. Only then did he succeed. So it is like this, the perfected ones couldn't help but think. They could all see that although this thing was not a real treasure, it had the ability to fight against the master of Dongtian. If used well, it could be a powerful weapon. Wen Qingxiang said again, from what I see, every ancient demon has an extraordinary supernatural power. If I can capture them one by one and refine them into Dharma weapons, my strength will increase greatly. Ran Xiushu was happy and said with a smile, in that case, this demon is not a scourge to our peers, but a treasure. Shen Baishuang said from his seat, that is not wrong. Even the Dragon King, Green Locust, and other demons were also refined into Dharma weapons by us. At this moment, Gan Shouting stood up and said, may I ask Jinren Zhang, if we want to kill demons and sacrifice ourselves to refine this magical treasure, where should we go? Zhang Yan looked at him deeply and said, Reverend Gan, there is no need to be impatient. There is a place here that is similar to our Qinsong school's Longyuan Lake. After discussion with the two sect masters, we have decided to conquer this place. When the time comes, there will be room for you reverends to display your skills. When the perfected ones heard this, they were stunned at first, but then their hearts were filled with excitement. Although they had established a foothold in the mountain and sea realm, they had not yet established a sect, so they could not be considered to have a firm foothold. Because the situation in the mountain and sea realm was not clear, they knew that they had to wait for the right time. They did not expect that the three reverends would find a suitable place so quickly. Once a sect established a foothold in the mountain and sea realm, it would not be long before the other sects were established. Among the sects, the Qinsong school was the strongest. The cultivators of the 9 continents had 3 mortal molts, and if the black tortoise was included, there were 3 of them in the Qinsong school. For the Qinsong school to establish a sect first, everyone thought that it was only right and proper. Qi Hongchan said, Reverend Zhang, where is the location of the mountain and sea realm? Zhang Yan pointed at him and said, Everyone, please take a look at the map. As he spoke, a ball of light flashed to the north of the map, enveloping an area. It looked like an inland sea. It didn't look big on the map, but compared to the 6 continents of the North Sea, it wasn't inferior at all. Zhang Yan said, this place is known as the Frigid Jade Continent. It is occupied by a demon king called the Great Sage Green Melon, who is the father of the Great Sage Yang outside the temple. According to the fellow Taoists from the eastern wasteland, this demon has no less than a few dozen ancient demons under his command. If we conquer this place, our Qinsong school will not take any of the ancient demon corpses. They will be distributed among our fellow Taoists. Qi Hongchan said, Reverend Zhang, I don't think that's necessary. As for how many treasures we can take, that will depend on our own abilities. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Sect Master Qi, this is the only time. Don't do it again. After my Yudsong sect has established itself, we will also assist other sects in establishing their own sections. At that time, we won't return empty-handed, so it won't be a loss. Hearing this, the Taoists in the audience couldn't help but smile. Pu Xianxing, the sect leader of the Huanzhen Temple, stood up and bowed. He asked in a clear voice, "Reverend Zhang, when is the date of the expedition?" The temple suddenly fell silent. Zhang Yan looked down at the crowd and said slowly, "The daughter of the demon king Green Melon has been captured by me." According to the fellow Taoists from the eastern wasteland, when he hears the news, he will gather his troops to attack us. We don't need to wait for the demons to come to us. We can kill them first. If everything goes well, we might be able to capture them all in one fell swoop. Therefore, there is no need for this date to be early or late. Let's set it to be a month from now. Reverends, please go back and make some preparations. When the Taoists heard this, they all solemnly agreed. This battle would determine whether the cultivators of the 9 continents could establish themselves in this realm. They didn't dare to be negligent. Zhang Yan looked out of the temple. This was the best opportunity. The cultivators of the 9 continents had just arrived in the mountain and sea realm, and the demons of the northern wintry abyss knew nothing about them. They also didn't know that they were about to attack. It could be said that the initiative was in their hands. The discussion in the temple was about how the cultivators of the various sects should cooperate for the battle. However, it wasn't a difficult matter. In less than 2 hours, there was a result. Seeing that there was nothing else to discuss, the Taoists took their leave. Gan Shouting and Ji Xiangping were about to leave when they heard a voice in their ears, "Please wait." The two of them recognized Zhang Yan's voice and quickly stood still. Zhang Yan waited until there was no one else in the temple, then invited the two to take their seats. Gan Shouting carefully asked, "Reverend Zhang, what orders do you have?" Zhang Yan said, "Just now when the Taoists are discussing, why are the two of you not saying anything?" Gan Shouting sighed and said, "Reverend, you should know that we are cultivators of the Dongsheng continent. We don't know much about the abilities of the various sects, and we don't have any friendship with the reverends. Naturally, we can't speak." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "In that case, I have a task for the two of you to do. If you do it well, I will give you a great merit." Gan Shouting carefully asked, "What is it?" Zhang Yan said, "In this world, other than the ancient demon, we also need to be wary of those strange races. They are different from the demons and have been fighting with the various countries of the East Wilderness for thousands of years. Gradually, they have developed some atmosphere. Not only do they establish their own countries, they also have laws and rituals. There is also a hierarchy among them. There are many people with high cultivation, but if there is someone who is on good terms with the great sage Qing Pai, he might help me when I attack the cold Jade Ocean continent. Therefore, I need the two of you to keep a close eye on him." Gan Shouting was a little hesitant and said, "If there are many enemies, I'm afraid the two of us won't be able to hold them off." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry, the strange races are not united. Even if there are movements, there won't be many of them. If there really is an accident, I will allow the two of you to retreat." Gan Shouting and Ji Xiangping looked at each other and bowed together, saying, "We promise." Chapter 1246. After the meeting, the heavens abodes of the various sects returned to their respective immortals' caves. Every day, they would refine their magical treasures and gather medicinal pills in preparation for the upcoming battle. Just now, the 9 continents' mortal tribulation had just ended, and they had gained a lot from it. Many of their techniques needed to be tested, and this battle was undoubtedly an opportunity. In a dark immortal's cave, great sage Yang was curled up in a ball, his eyes closed, as if he were in a deep sleep. However, his feathers trembled from time to time, and it was clear that he was not calm. Xue Dingyuan sat on a high platform, and behind him was an illusory sea serpent Qi, which was constantly changing. At this moment, he was using the Origin Mirage sect's secret magic to drag the demon into an illusory world. All of the demon's experiences from when it was young to when it grew up would be displayed by his divine ability. This method was much more convenient than using divine sense to search, and even the faded memories of the target would be dug up. He was not very interested in the demon itself. This time, he had been instructed by Zhang Yan to observe the demon's experiences in the Mieming bird tribe before it came to the eastern wasteland, so that he could find the tribe's weaknesses and what they needed to be wary of. After a few days, he withdrew from the divine ability and pointed out with his finger, which transformed into a magical talisman. Then he waved his sleeve, and the copper bell hanging high above him began to buzz. After a while, a young boy walked in and said, "What are your orders, Reverend?" Shui Dingyuan handed the talisman to him and said, "You can give this to Reverend Zhang." The young boy took it, bowed, and carefully retreated. Shui Dingyuan stood up and said, "The mountain and sea realm is indeed vast. Even in the northern heaven frigid abyss, the green nightmare demon king tribe is not the only power there. However, if I can capture some of them, it will be convenient for me to improve my cultivation base." He glanced at Great Sage Jiang, then flicked his sleeve and left. In the southeast of the heaven-mending formation was a huge medicinal herb garden, where alchemists from all sects of the 9 continents were gathered. "Dean Zhou, this is the medicinal herb I've collected from the mountain and sea realm this month. They are all here." Zhou Chongju picked up a piece of pitch-black vine, but it suddenly began to wriggle like a little person, continuously wailing there. Gradually, it revealed a ferocious ghost face and let out a series of howls, trying its best to intimidate. Zhou Chongju was not affected at all. His expression was normal as he said, "Strong on the outside but weak on the inside. The medicinal power is only ordinary." He reached out his hand and the ghost face immediately disappeared. A puff of smoke floated out. He stretched out his hand and grabbed it, saying, "Natural baleful energy, gather 1,000 and you can refine a martial pill." The pills were divided into civil and martial ones. The civil pill protected one's life, while the martial pill could kill. Most of them were Wendan, and the Rui Dan that was given to Zhang Yan before the human tribulation was a martial Dan. A disciple beside him hurriedly picked up a brush and wrote down everything he said on the jade board, not daring to miss a single word. Zhou Chongju tossed the vine aside and picked up a withered yellow beard. Although it looked light, it sank slightly when he held it in his hand. He used 2 fingers to clamp the yin and yang sides. With a single stroke, drops of juice dripped down. When it fell to the ground, it made a clanging sound like copper beans. He said, "If I come across this grass in the future, I'll be very happy. All of them will be dealt with according to this rule." The disciple quickly wrote it down. Zhou Chongju spent an entire day looking through all the medicinal herbs he had gathered. Naturally, other than a few special plants that he needed to personally examine, most of them were illuminated by the magical treasures of the Pill Cauldron courtyard. Thus, he was able to get some clues. He stroked his beard. In a low voice, he said, "Too little. Too little. Is this all you've collected in the past month?" The disciple bowed his head. "Dean Zhou, it's not that we didn't do our best, but the mountain and sea realm is simply too big. Many of the exotic plants are living creatures, and they run wild. Some of them are even under the protection of the outsider demons, making them very difficult to harvest." The mountain and sea realm was different from the 9 continents. Cultivators occupied all of the famous mountains and lakes, while the demons were mostly trapped in the North Darkstar continent. Gathering precious materials was not easy. Zhou Chongju muttered to himself for a moment, then waved his hand. "You may leave. I'll think about it." The disciple felt as if he had been pardoned, and hurriedly retreated. Zhou Chongju stroked his beard thoughtfully. Because of this, the mountain and the 9 continents were different. Most of the pill formulas were useless and needed to be tested again. During the past month, he had sent disciples out to gather medicinal plants. Although they had gained quite a bit, most of the medicinal plants they had collected were ordinary. That was because most of the precious materials in the mountain and sea realm were found in the lands of the outsiders and demons. If he wanted to get them, he couldn't avoid them. However, if he could use them to gather medicinal plants, it would be far more convenient than sending disciples out. Of course, he would have to offer them some sort of reward. This is an important matter, he thought. I need to ask junior brother what he thinks. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he wrote a letter and sent it out. Zhang Yan was currently sitting cross-legged in his immortal's cave. Although he had cultivated the Tao of Strength to the 6th revolution, and his battle prowess was no less than that of a mortal molting, the longer he stayed in the Tao of Strength, and the more he fought, the more likely it was that he would be compatible with it. Therefore, he hadn't given up on cultivating the Tao of Energy. In this place, there were countless spiritual opportunities. After a month of cultivation, he could sense that in another year, he would be able to break through the 8th barrier. Jingyu handed over a letter and said, "Master, sect leader Zhou, just now you sent a letter. I didn't dare to delay, so I delivered it first." Zhang Yan took the letter and read it. After a moment of thought, he said, "Senior brother, this matter is indeed important. However, I'll have to put it aside for now. I'll deal with it after I return from conquering the icy Jade continent." It wasn't that he hadn't thought about coming into contact with the outsiders, but there were tens of thousands of tribes, and they were all mixed up. They weren't like the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland, which only had a few large nations. The reason for this situation was that many of the tribes had the shadow of an ancient demon behind them. Before figuring out their background, it wasn't a good idea to come into contact with them. Furthermore, from the information he had received from the Eastern Wasteland, almost all of the outsider tribes respected strength. Normally speaking with them was useless, and the only way was to intimidate them. This time, as long as he conquered the icy Jade continent, he would be able to intimidate them. In the guest house, Gong Shizhao and Gong Ziyu were fiddling with their instruments. Just like Shin Fanghua and Mo Du, the two of them also realized that having a talisman in hand could greatly increase their combat ability. That way, they would undoubtedly have a great advantage in the battle against the outsiders and demons. After trying many times, Gong Ziyu still couldn't get the gist of it. He suppressed the blood in his chest and said irritably, "Although the treasure is good, it's not easy to successfully refine it." Gong Shizhao said, "I've told you many times that this talisman isn't for us mystic cultivators to use. Blood chi can't be used to refine it, and can only be guided by spiritual opportunity." Gong Ziyu couldn't help but shake his head. He also knew the logic behind it. However, after hundreds of years of cultivation, he had already refined the blood chi, spirit, and will into one. Once the spiritual opportunity was triggered, blood chi would definitely come out. How could it be changed so easily? He put the instrument in his hand aside and said, "Even if this item is successfully refined, it can't be used to its fullest potential. Only when I know the method of refining and become a treasure for us mystic cultivators can it be of great use." However, Gong Shizhao said, "That's the logic, but the cultivators of the 9 continents won't hand over the method of refining to us so easily. Then, I'll have to figure it out myself." Gong Ziyu took a look and frowned. "Jiue, can't the country take out something useful to exchange with the cultivators of the 9 continents?" Gong Shizhao said in a deep voice, "Our eastern barren country has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. How can we not take out something of this level? However, we can't put all our hopes on this. We still have to do what needs to be done." Gong Ziyu thought for a while and reached out to pick up the instrument again. At this moment, the jade curtain moved slightly, and a servant said from outside, "Young master, that priest Zhou is here to visit." Gong Ziyu didn't dare to delay and said, "Invite him in." Not long after, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Zhou Xian walked in and bowed. "Greetings to the two of you." Gong Ziyu quickly returned the greeting. Because they had interacted many times these days, they could be considered to be familiar with each other. After exchanging a few polite words, Gong Ziyu invited Gong Ziyu to sit down and talk. Then, he ordered the servant to bring over the heart-calming tea that he had exchanged for with a considerable price. Zhou Xian thanked him and sat down. He straightened his body and said in a clear voice, "I have come to inform the two of you that the cultivators of the 9 continents will be heading north to attack the cold Jade Ocean Prefecture next month. In a few days, we will be leaving these 6 continents. If it's not convenient, envoy, you may leave first." Attack the cold Jade Ocean Prefecture? Gong Shizhao's body trembled and a look of shock appeared on his face. He stood up and asked again, Sir, you mean to say that you want to attack the cold Jade Ocean Prefecture? Zhou Xian didn't move from his seat. He picked up the fragrant tea and took a sip. Then, in a natural manner, he said, "Honored envoy did not hear wrongly." He wasn't afraid that the news would leak out. There were no flying swords or talismans in the mountain and sea realm, and they relied on birds to send messages from afar. The northern heaven frigid abyss was very far away, and the news would not arrive in a short period of time. Even now, it was likely that Green Grasshopper still didn't know that his daughter was imprisoned. Besides, even if the Demon King knew, it wouldn't be a big deal. With so many people from the heavens abode moving out, it would definitely cause quite a commotion. There was no way to hide it. This was an open war, so there was no need to hide it. Gongziyu said bitterly, "But that's Demon King Green Grasshopper." Zhou Xian's expression was calm as he casually said, "So what?" The Heavens Abode has already taken a liking to the cold Jade Ocean Prefecture. It can be the place where the Qinsong school will establish our sect. If any demons, devils, or outsiders are disobedient, I don't care if they are demon kings or great sages, I'll just kill them all. Gong Qinsong's heart trembled. After he sent great sage Yang to these people from beyond the heavens, he thought that they would tighten their defenses. Who knew that these cultivators not only didn't do so, but also wanted to take the initiative to attack, and even wanted to invade the place where he lived. After a while, he finally calmed down from this shocking news and couldn't help but guess the real intention of the other party. Telling them about this, was it to let them leave earlier? Or to attack the cold Jade Ocean Prefecture together? If it was the latter, it would be a bit difficult. Great Sage Green Grasshopper's reputation was extremely great, and it was unknown how strong he was. If they didn't destroy it in one go, the cultivators of the 9 continents could just return to beyond the heavens, but the Eastern Barren country wouldn't be able to escape. However, when he thought about the ability of the Duzhen Hall Master, he suddenly realized that this might be a good opportunity. So, he took a deep breath, put his hands together, and said, "Fellow Zhou, if you can trust me, I'm willing to do my best to help." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "If you have a decision, there's no need to tell me. I've troubled you today, so I'll take my leave now." After saying that, he stood up, waved his sleeve, and turned to leave. Chapter 1247. In front of the main hall, the great sage Ban Xia was lying on the empty square, looking a little listless. He was waiting for these people from beyond the sky to come and ask him to surrender, but they were obviously more interested in the great sage Yang than him, leaving him here for a few days. He wanted to take the initiative to surrender, but he was afraid that doing so would be looked down upon. So deep in his heart, he was full of contradictions. As he was sighing, he suddenly saw 2 beams of spiritual light coming over from the corner of his eye, landing on the platform in front of him. He couldn't help but raise his head and brace himself. The great sage Yang was no longer here, and it was obviously coming for him. At this moment, the people who came were Wen Qingxiang and Hibiko Higashi. When they landed in front of the hall, Wen Qingxiang said, "My friend, why do you like this demon?" Dong Jinzi said, "I've heard that this demon's supernatural power can hide in the sunlight and absorb the essence of the sun and the moon. It can move very fast and cannot be harmed by normal means. My instrument was damaged by the human tribulation when I fought with the Ying-Tsang sect's Zhenren. Now that we're going to fight again, I can only use it to make up the numbers." Wen Qingxiang said, "My friend, you still have the 9 spirits banner in your sect. Why don't you ask Zhenren Zhang for it? Now that the battle is imminent, Zhenren Zhang will most likely return such a thing to your Jiuling sect." Hibiko Higashi shook his head gently and said, "This treasure is difficult to control. My cultivation is not enough now. Even if it is in my hands, I won't use it." The reason why she made this decision was because she had other considerations. After this battle, the 2 sect masters Qin and you were very likely to give her the purple pure spiritual opportunity, which was extremely useful for people in Dongtian to improve their cultivation. She didn't want to miss it. And now, she hadn't made any achievements yet, and her cultivation was not very high among her peers. If the result of this battle was great, then even if she took the 9 spirits banner today, she probably wouldn't be able to get the good pure spiritual qi in the future. When Qingxiang smiled and said, "But to refine this demon, you will inevitably owe sect master Tao a favor." Hibiko Higashi said, "It doesn't matter. I have a woods pine dragon in my possession. It was originally obtained from a cultivator of Taihao school by an elder of my sect. I heard that it was refined by Taoist Master Crane in the past. By returning Tao Jinren, I believe I can return this favor." Wen Qingxiang was a little surprised, then nodded and said, "Master Tao is the disciple of Immortal Crane. If that's the case, he definitely won't hesitate to make a move." The two of them spoke without the slightest scruples here, and it naturally entered into the ears of the great sage, causing him to be terrified to the point his soul almost left his body. He was extremely flustered, and he couldn't be bothered about being reserved. He immediately shouted, "Wait, wait. Please don't kill me. I'm willing to surrender, I'm willing to surrender." Hibiko Higashi stood in front of him. He wasn't in a hurry to attack. He asked, "There seem to be quite a number of demons like you in the outside world. If I don't refine them into magic weapons, what's the use of keeping you here?" The great sage knew that he had to prove his value at this time, so he hurriedly said, "When I cultivate every day, I need to swim with the clouds, so I can see things that ordinary people can't see. I'm especially knowledgeable about geography, mountains and rivers, and even know a little about the magical powers of many great sages. Keeping me here can help you find more big demons." Hibiko Higashi grunted and said, "You're good. But after I search your soul, I can also find out these things." The great sage didn't know why he wanted to search his soul, but he knew that it was certainly not a good thing. He was so anxious that his forehead was covered with sweat. He said, "Wait, there's more, there's more." Hibiko Higashi and Wen Qingxiang were not in a hurry. They stood there calmly, waiting to see what else he could take out. The great sage racked his brains, desperately trying to think of what else he could do that could attract the attention of these two. After a short moment, his eyes lit up and he said, "This little demon has another ability. I've raised numerous cloud-refined insects under my command, and they're capable of burrowing into the ground and traversing the sea and rivers. They're capable of going to any dangerous place. All those years ago, this little demon relied precisely on these insects to find an azure cloud fruit and attain intelligence." The two couldn't help but be a little surprised. Although this skill was not like the magical power that could overturn rivers and seas, if it was really as this demon bragged and used well, it would be extremely beneficial for the cultivators of the 9 states to open up sections. Moreover, this demon was also cunning. This skill did not belong to him, but to his disciples and granddisciples. Even if he was captured and refined into a magical weapon, he couldn't use it. When Qingxiang smiled and turned his eyes, saying, "My friend Dong Jin, this demon can't be killed yet, but if there are other demons that are interested, I will do my best to help." Hibiko Higashi thought for a moment and said to the great sage Ban Xia, "Just now you say you know many magical powers of demons, tell me a few of them." The great sage was overjoyed and hurriedly told the location of more than a dozen demons, including a few that had enmity with him or were not on good terms with him. Hibiko Higashi thought for a moment, then turned around and said, "My friend Wen, let's go and find the great sage of Blackhorn first." Wen Qingxiang smiled and said, "Okay." Watching the two leave, the great sage knew that he had escaped a disaster. Thinking of the fate of his enemies, he couldn't help but feel happy and couldn't help but laugh. To the north of the 100 countries of the eastern wilderness, there was a mountain range that rose and fell like a barrier, crossing from east to west and blocking from north to south. There were only a few mountain passes that could be passed through. This place was called Mount Long Yen. To the south, one could overlook the Yunyuan, and to the north, one could pass through the forest and mountains, and then to the high capital of the cold abyss. When the Donghua Divine Kingdom was still there, this place was a barrier that guarded the border, and its importance was self-evident. However, after the collapse of the Divine Kingdom, most of this place was taken by the great sage of Ancient Demon or the Unusual Race. Only a small, unimportant mountain pass in the south was still in the hands of the 100 countries of human Tao, maintaining the last bit of face. Because of this, There was almost no decent barrier in the north of the 100 countries of the eastern wilderness. The unusual race and unusual race could come and go as they pleased. Every 10 years or so, there would be news of cities being breached in the northern countries. However, if the land to the north of the Yunyuan was taken away, it would be equivalent to stabbing the weakness of all the vassal states. This was absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, they had no choice but to migrate a large number of people from the hinterland to rebuild the city. This was equivalent to opening a wound on the 100 countries of the eastern wilderness that was hard to recover. It would bleed continuously, and it would be difficult for the states to recover their national power. For thousands of years, the eastern wilderness had tried to take back Mount Long Yen using the opportunity of several vassal states, but all of them ended in failure. In the depths of the west of the mountain, there was a tribe of Sun people. The people of this tribe looked strange. Their hands were hanging on the ground, their feet were like stilts, and their faces were like apes. They had no hair and no tail, and only their long hair covered them. However, all of them could run as fast as they could fly, and they were good at shooting and throwing. Although there was no great mystic cultivator in the tribe, they worshipped a ringed-eye demon sage. Although he was not famous, his strength was not weak. In addition, this place was barren, and there was little vegetation, so no one came to provoke him. However, on this day, a dark green light descended from the sky, and then it transformed into a person dressed as a mystic cultivator. He said loudly, "Is Gao Huantong here, Chachingi? Come and pay your respects." On top of a stone house in the mountain, a long worm that was curled up like a thread swayed, and it transformed into a dog-eyed elder holding a Teng staff. He stood far away, holding the staff firmly, and said cautiously, "Great Sage Pan Jing? What are you doing here?" Cha Qingyi put his hands together and bowed, saying, "Great Sage Ring Pupil, I am here to invite you to come out of the mountain and save someone with me." Great Sage Ring Pupil did not reject immediately, but asked, "Save who?" Cha Qingyi said slowly, "Shu Yeyang." Great Sage Ring Pupil was silent for a long time, and then said, "How many?" Cha Qingyi said confidently, "I have already convinced 4 great sages. If you are willing to join, then there will be 6. Great Sage Yeong had been in the eastern wasteland for a long time, and she was not alone. In addition, she was the daughter of Great Sage Qing Feng, so naturally, there were many demons that came to her. However, Great Sage Yeong was arrogant, and thought highly of her noble birth, so she did not like these wild demons. However, when they heard that she was captured by the people of Eastern Wasteland and was sent to the hands of outsiders, these demons became active again, and under Cha Qingyi's lead, they wanted to rescue her. Cha Qingyi waited for a long time, and seeing that Great Sage Ring Pupil was still standing there without saying anything, she could not help but ask, "Why are you hesitating, Great Sage Ring Pupil? 6 great sages, they can even kill 100 countries of Eastern Wasteland. What is there to be afraid of?" Great Sage Ring Pupil shook his head and said, "That's not the case. No one knows what those outsiders are capable of. They dare to imprison Shu Yang, so they are not afraid of Qing Feng Demon King." The great mystic warriors of the 100 countries of Eastern Wasteland were scattered everywhere, and any country would be powerless against 6 great sages. By the time the great mystic warriors of the various countries came to help, they would have already retreated. However, they did not know anything about these outsiders, and they could travel through the void, so how could they be so easy to deal with? Cha Qingyi laughed. "Great Sage Ring Pupil, you worry too much. The outsiders have just arrived, so how would they know how powerful Qing Feng Demon King is? Moreover, this news has already spread out, and I think that once this person knows, he will definitely not allow his bloodline to fall into the hands of outsiders. I think it will not be long before he leads his people to the south." Great Sage Ring Pupil frowned. "Since Great Sage Qing Feng will come sooner or later, why not wait for him to come, and we attack together?" Cha Qingyi sneered. "When Great Sage Qing Ying comes, those old demons will definitely go up to curry favor with him. Will it be our turn?" Only at this time will we show our sincerity, and Shu Yang will also remember our benefits. Great Sage Ring Pupil thought about it, and felt that there was some truth in what he said, But he still felt uneasy. Facing an unknown opponent, it was too rash to just go up like this. Seeing his expression, Great Sage Ring Pupil said, "Don't worry, Great Sage Ring Pupil. This time, I will definitely rescue Shu Yang. If I fail, then I will retreat early. As long as Great Sage Qing Feng comes, I will let him know that I have this intention." Hearing this, Great Sage Ring Pupil's originally frowned face immediately relaxed. He thought that he only needed to show his face, and with his ability, even if he encountered danger, it should not be difficult for him to escape. Therefore, he agreed, "All right, count me in." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.